I wanted to call this hearing of the Pennsylvania Basic Ed Funding Commission to order. Slight technical difficulties. You got it? Okay, good. All right. Call the hearing to an order pursuant to Act 51 of 2014. For purposes of those in attendance today, as you are aware, the charge of our commission is to work in a collaborative fashion, bicameral fashion, with the administration to develop for Pennsylvania a new basic education funding formula. It has been something that we've taken the opportunity over the last 7 or 8 months, I guess, since the act was passed, to initially go forward with a fact-finding process where we've gone to communities throughout Pennsylvania, urban communities, suburban communities around our larger cities, in rural communities, as many places in Pennsylvania as possible, to hear from experts and citizens about what they believe is the proper approach for Pennsylvania to pursue when it comes to establishing a new basic ed funding formula. I've been serving in the General Assembly for 21 years now, and we've had many iterations of budgets with formulas and without formulas, trying to accommodate the many diverse needs of Pennsylvania. And it's been, I guess to put it mildly, difficult to have a formula that sustains itself over a period of time. So one of our goals is to put forward a formula for the General Assembly to consider that will be effective in allowing districts to have more predictability in regards to its support, its important level of support from state government. No doubt Pennsylvania is a very, very diverse state, as you all know, and it is very difficult to develop one set formula that accommodates all that diversity. But one thing I have noticed as I've joined my colleagues across Pennsylvania is there's a lot of common elements in regards to the needs of our students and the needs of our various school districts. And that makes it the task a little easier, not easy, but a little easier in terms of advancing our plan forward. I also want to take an opportunity to thank the Greenville School District and Greenville High School for accommodating me here today. I've been in Greenville before. When I left the hotel, I was driving towards the community, and I finally became more familiar with the community when I saw the big steam engine downtown. I'm one of those train enthusiasts. That was, now I definitely knew where I was when I saw it. It's a very historic asset to have downtown. So with that, I would like to take an opportunity to give the members an opportunity to introduce themselves to the people that are here, starting from my left.
Crawford, Erie County.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Chris Wakely. I'm Executive Director of the House Education Committee. I'm a designee of Representative James Roebuck, who's the chairman, Democratic chairman of that committee from Philadelphia.
Good morning. State Representative Mark Longetti. I represent the 7th District, where we're at right now. Greenville and West Salem Township are new parts of my district, so happy to have the commission here.
Donna Overlander from Clarion County.
County. I also represent part of Armstrong and Forest County, and I am part of the commission.
Okay. We also have some, I want to appreciate the members who represent Mercer County and the surrounding areas for hosting us as well. Representative Longetti and Representative Oberlander, as a member of the commission, have been, who are from the Northwest region of Pennsylvania, have been traveling the state with us and have done a tremendous job participating and providing their input in regards to making sure the formula represents the interest of Northwestern Pennsylvania. So thank you for that. We also have some members who are with us via a teleconference in Harrisburg. You can take an opportunity to let them introduce themselves as well.
Morning, everyone. Somebody at the stage after open. We appreciate services Representative Longetti testifying, certainly the school districts that are involved today. I think your message was quite clear, and we're united on that message, and we're just glad to partake. How many members here in Harrisburg during staff with us?
Representative Mike Verb, who's with us by teleconference, is my co-chair on the commission. Before we get started, I also want to turn it back to Representative Longetti for some commentary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to acknowledge, as has been introduced, some of my colleagues from the surrounding area, State Senator Michelle Brooks, Representative Brad Roy, and Representative Park Wentling, and appreciate their commitments and their interest in this vital issue to the legislature. I want to thank the co-chairs, Senator Pat Brown and Representative Mike Verb, for scheduling this hearing today, and my colleagues who have traveled from various parts of the state and those that are participating by teleconferencing. Also certainly want to thank the Greenville Area School District and Superintendent Mark Ferreira for hosting us today. And a thank you to all of the testifiers and all of the interested parties who have traveled from the region to be here. In the first quarter of the 21st century, my grandfather, Nazareno Longetti, left his home country of Italy and settled right here in Greenville, Pennsylvania, hoping for a better life. He would eventually bring over several brothers and then his wife, Immaculata, and together they would raise 4 boys and a girl. My father, Al, graduated from Penn High School right here in Greenville, and his public education prepared him well for a career at Westinghouse Electric. My mother, Pearl, met him while she worked her first job here in Greenville after she graduated from public high school in the Sandy Lake area of Mercer County. She went on to college and as a non-traditional student earned a teaching degree and later a master's degree from Edinburgh University and taught public elementary school in Sharpsville for 20 years. My parents raised me and my older brother Fred, and we both graduated from the Sharpsville public school system, and it prepared us well for higher education, a career in law and later government for me, and while my brother became a successful small businessman in North Carolina. It's a story of our family. It's a Pennsylvania story, it's an American story, and its foundation is rooted in the value of a solid public education. Today, that story is repeated for many in Pennsylvania. For others, sadly, it is not. While a robust public education is still available for many students in Pennsylvania, for some students, it is elusive, in part because we lack a real funding formula to distribute basic education dollars in a fair, equitable, and adequate manner. Pennsylvania is, in fact, one of only 3 states that currently lacks such a funding formula. So that is the role of this commission, to develop a fair and equitable funding formula for basic education and to recommend it for the consideration of the full General Assembly. In many ways, it is a daunting task, but I believe that we are up to the task. I also believe that there may be no more important duty of the General Assembly, particularly in the next few months, than to develop and establish a basic education funding formula. So I eagerly look forward to the testimony today and to the work that lies ahead. And I again thank the co-chairs and my colleagues for holding this hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Longetti, and thank you for your hard work on behalf of your constituents here and all the children in Pennsylvania. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself. I am Senator Brown from Lehigh County, and I look forward to a productive hearing today. We'll start our agenda. First, we have a panel of superintendents for school districts in our local area here. Make sure, if I apologize if I ever get names wrong here. Okay, so it's Mark Ferreira. Mark Ferreira, Superintendent of Greenville. Thank you for hosting us today.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Michael Calla, Superintendent of Sharon City School District.
Good morning.
Thank you. Dr. Daniel Bell, Superintendent of Hermitage School District, and Dr. Brad Furco. Correct? Thank you. Superintendent of Sharpsville Area School District. Gentlemen, if we could ask you to testify separately. We have separate commentary. Try to limit your commentary to no longer than 10 minutes, and then we can open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I begin my testimony, one of the most important things is those of you who haven't found the restrooms, if you leave this facility, take a left. Before you go out to the exit, the hallway to your left, there are 2 restrooms, both unisex, so feel free to use it at your pleasure. Thank you. Currently, I am the superintendent of Greenville Area School District, and I'm serving my 35th year for the students of Pennsylvania. 16 of those years, I was a technology educator instructor, 19 years as a school administrator, and 9 of those years as superintendent, with the last 18 months serving here at Greenville. My professional education experience has been throughout Mercer and Lawrence County. Prior to today's hearing, I spent a significant amount of time reviewing the testimony from the previous 10 hearings. I commend the Commission for the wide variety of testimonies that have been presented, and I must say, you've heard testimony of a wide array of topics related to the countless challenges that we regularly face in the area of education funding. Please excuse me for not reviewing with you the information on tax rates, personal income rates, Act 1 limits, earned income dollars, or any of the countless topics that you've heard many times during the other hearings. Each of these can negatively impact public education in Pennsylvania. These items are critical and need to be considered in a fair and equitable funding formula. But this morning, I would like to take a different path. For the benefit of our visitors, it's important to note that listed on the Basic Education Funding Commission website are the following assignments. It says, the 15-member commission is charged with developing and recommending to the General Assembly a new formula for distributing state funding for basic education to Pennsylvania schools. And I might add, it's not an easy task. According to the Act, the new formula will take into account the following points: relative wealth, local tax effort, geographic price differences, enrollment levels, local support, and the last item, other factors. The last item, other factors, is what I would like to pursue. It's vital to note that the final approval of the legislator and the governor is needed before this act takes effect. We know that the 500 school districts in the Commonwealth vary quite dramatically in geographic size, student population, economic wealth, and community potential. What if neighboring school districts, regardless of size, were able to pool certain assets and work cooperatively? Could this be a positive factor for saving or creating as well as improving services for all students? Let me explain. Using the healthcare analogy, when we are faced with a significant health ailment, do we not search high and low for the best specialist? What if we follow this practice in an organized manner among school districts in each county? If If we truly want what's best for all students, then we must do and think differently. If educating our youth is a primary function of the state, then the state must take the lead in an aggressive, focused, and direct manner. Neighboring districts spend countless dollars on the duplication of many services. If we could creatively address this duplication, we may free up existing monies for other educational needs. May I share one current need we have? The need for focused career guidance serving our secondary students continues to grow, not only here in Mercer County, but throughout the state. For any district to allocate upwards of $60,000 for a full-time staff person to meet this demand during these challenging economic times is very. What if the state could help fund the position and 5 local districts also contribute? It might not be the ideal solution, but it would help meet a growing need. The instructor could spend 1 day per week in each district and coordinate career guidance activities between the schools as well as in each school. Using a fellow superintendent's line, I would like you to ponder this question. Do you know the most difficult animal to kill in Pennsylvania is? It's a school mascot. Do you know what the definition of insanity is? It's doing the same old, and expecting different results. Ladies and gentlemen of the Basic Education Funding Commission, we need to consider different options for the education dollars that we invest, especially any new monies. If the state were to provide guidance and significant one-time seed money, then I firmly believe that in these challenging economic times, schools and communities will work cooperatively on ventures to change and improve the future of education for all students. As part of the funding formula option, I noted earlier, significant one-time financial incentives will work. Give it a try. We desperately need the Commonwealth to take the financial lead. One such example that is currently underway is the Entrepreneurial Academy at Linden Point in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. Let me briefly explain the academy. I have included a few pieces of literature for your review. Hopefully you've had a chance to just page through it. It's in your packet. The way the academy works is as follows. The IU and 7 Mercer County School Districts received a $100,000 DCED grant monies to help initiate the program. 7 school districts in Mercer County send a total of 25 students to the program. Each participating district contributed $1,000 per student for another $25,000 that was added to the grant. Seniors from the 7 sending districts, a total of 25, attend their regular classes in the home district. And then in the afternoon, they attend the academy. Through additional grant money, students have the option on Fridays to attend the community college class if they wish to, at no cost to them or their families. This has proven to be a wonderful collaboration effort that has positive lifelong benefits for these students. Year 2 of the program is expected to have an excess of student applicants for the academy. Funding this formula, I can tell by the look on your faces, how do we fund this proposal? One suggestion that I have is to take a percentage of new educational funds that are allocated to each district in each county. That could be a small percentage or a large percentage. Also, I would hope that each intermediate unit could have a role to coordinate this effort. I realize that today's hearing is not specifically focused on creative endeavors to solve the funding issue. But as the superintendent of the Greenville School District, I can assure you that significant seed monies that would be made available to help our county schools work on cooperative ventures will make a difference. Savings would be achieved, services improved, and additional opportunities for all students would be realized. Students that may not have the possibility without this funding. Imagine the idea of coordinated shared services being multiplied and expanded in all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. The possibilities are endless. One final comment. For the sake of time, I won't read it, but I've included a copy of a letter I sent to our new governor shortly after the election. Please read it when you have a chance. I hope he will positively embrace my request for investing new educational dollars in an attempt to improve and expand our educational effort in creative and cooperative ways. A previous school board member once told me, we talk things to death in Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, now is the time to act. Please know that we in northwestern Pennsylvania are grateful for you making the trip to Mercer County, specifically to Greenville, to conduct this hearing. We realize you have a difficult challenge and applaud your service and commitment to the students and citizens of Pennsylvania. I would like to thank the members of the Basic Education Commission, Mr. Longetti and his team, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the students of the Greenville Area School District and the students throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrara. Good morning. I'd like to thank the members of the Basic Education Funding Commission, and in particular our District 7 representative, Mark Longetti, for providing me with this opportunity to address you with regarding funding issues facing school districts across the Commonwealth. I'm Michael Calla, Superintendent of the Sharon City School District, where I've proudly served our children and their families for the past 27 years. In addition to my public school service, I've also worked within the Pennsylvania parochial school system for an additional 8 years. During my time with Sharon City, I've served as an assistant principal, supervisor of curriculum instruction, acting superintendent, and currently as superintendent of schools. The perspective that I hope to provide you with today may be different from that which you have heard in other testimony, in that my district relies heavily on state and federal funding sources. 66% of our current budget comes from state and federal funding sources. And this is used to maintain basic operations to provide high-quality educational opportunities for our students. From the Sharon perspective, the flaws in the current funding system deal more specifically with consistency and equity rather than pure dollars and cents. Through my comments, I hope to address 3 areas of concern. These include, 1, the need to eliminate overall funding disparities between districts. Second, the need to provide predictable funding levels from year to year. And thirdly, the necessity to provide for sustainability to allow districts to maintain their high-quality academic programming. It's my hope that today's testimony will provide you with a better understanding of our concerns with regard to each of these areas. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Sharon City School District. Our district is classified as an urban center located in a rural county. With approximately 2,100 students, we are currently the largest district within Mercer County. As a district, we are also very compact, with all of our students coming from within the city of Sharon's 4 square mile boundaries. Real estate values in the city range from homes that sell for $5,000 to those that sell for $500,000, with the median assessed value of $13,050 as per the Homestead Property Exclusion Certified Report of Median Value. Many formerly single-family dwellings have been converted into rental properties, which tend to be used by multiple families. Our student population is also very diverse, with over 12 races and ethnicities represented. Most importantly is the fact that Sharon consistently ranks in the bottom 5% of the poorest school districts across the Commonwealth. U.S. Census data from 2010 indicates that 29% of our children live in poverty, with over 90% of our school children in 2 of our district's 4 buildings receiving free lunches. The Board of Education and our administrative team have worked diligently during the past 5 years to address the fiscal challenges caused by the economic downturn and the loss of funding caused by the Commonwealth's own budget deficit. As a district, Sharon saw a nearly $2 million decrease in funding from school year 2010-11 to school year 2014-15. And there's a chart on the handout that you can reference. While average school funding cuts hit the poorest school districts the hardest, Sharon's per pupil cuts exceeded even the average of the 50 poorest districts in Pennsylvania. The poorest 50 school districts, according to the chart, averaged a $474.85 decrease. Sharon's decrease per pupil was $817 per pupil. This decrease has caused the district to reduce professional staffing levels, increase class sizes across the board, eliminate replacement of dated technology and textbooks, reduce support for the arts, athletics, and extracurricular programs, and eliminate many elective courses. As an example of the impact such cuts entail, the district was forced to reduce its physical education staff at the elementary building at a time when student wellness and childhood obesity is a growing concern. At the same time, we can clearly document that our test scores began to slide as a result of the reduced staffing and are now at 5-year lows. While funding was reduced, fixed costs continue to climb. Double-digit increases in the PSERS contribution rate, on average 10% yearly increases in health care benefits, in addition to the additional fees imposed as part of the Affordable Care Act, mandated and unfunded initiatives such as the implementation of PIMS and TIMS systems all continue to impact the district's fiscal health. As you can see, current funding practices impact the poorest districts the hardest, which lead to greater hardships for our residents. As an example, a single mill of property taxes in Sharon raises just under $90,000 in income for the district. This same mill in a neighboring district provides over $300,000. Thus, to support the same level of programming and quality, the Sharon taxpayer must provide 3.3 mills of new taxes, while their neighbors, literally across the street in some cases, pay only 1 additional mill. Thus, while our cost increases and mandates are very similar to our neighbors, our ability to raise funds is not, and disparity is created. The current costing structure creates this disparity in funding and leads to inequity in the quality of resources, class sizes, and facilities that students have access to based only upon their zip code. In addition, the disparity of cost for students attending charter and cyber schools creates fiscal distress. While our per-student cost is $7,781, the per-student cost at a neighboring brick-and-mortar charter is $6,372, yet we are assessed a tuition rate of $7,886, and that's as per the 12-13 school performance profile fiscal data charts. In addition, the cost for special needs students attending the charter programs nearly doubles that amount. The inequity is even greater for cyber programs that do not have facility charges seen by the brick-and-mortar facilities. For the Sharon City School District, the charter and cyber charter cost for the 12-13-14 school year alone amounted to $1.8 million annually for fewer than 190 students enrolled. The unpredictable nature of the funding process is also a concern for our district. As mentioned earlier, in the one-year period from 2010-11 to 2011-12, the funding for our district decreased nearly $2 million. No matter what your political view may be regarding the reason for the decrease, to the district and to our constituents, it was a loss of $2 million. Drastic cuts had to be made in programs that have been implemented to improve student academic progress, provide 21st century resources, and support to our poorest students. It is my opinion that the education of our children should not be a political pawn to be played. Rather, the Commonwealth needs to develop a structured funding formula which ensures reasonable and reliable funding from district to district and from year to year. This formula should also consider the number and type of mandates being implemented and include language that will ensure that new mandates, for example, PIMS or the Common Core Standard implementation, should be accompanied by costing out studies and should not be imposed on school districts without comparable remuneration. The ultimate concern must be that whatever the funding plan, it must provide for the sustainability of high-quality educational programs for every student across the Commonwealth. A recent Columbia University study on poverty clearly indicates that poverty is the single most important factor in a child's academic success or failure. While a structured school funding formula will not resolve the issue of poverty, ensuring that each child receives the same level of high-quality educational programming will begin to break the cycle that so many of our families are currently caught in. By way of example, as mentioned above, 29% of Sharon's children live in poverty. Not coincidentally, the district faces an annual rate of transients in 2 of our buildings of over 33%, with the other 2 buildings averaging 26%. This means that on average, 1 in every 3 children who begin the year in our schools are not there at the end of the year. More amazing is that those seats are consistently filled with new students, children from homes where poverty drives decisions like living arrangements, preschool and daycare quality, and the academic support that the families provide for their children. The district and our wonderful staff and community must provide food, clothing, educational resources, and in some cases, the only warm, safe place these children have. For a large percentage of our families, when food and shelter are their priority, supporting their children's educational needs fades to a distant third. The level of poverty a community, and thus its schools experiences, must be a strong consideration in any funding formula debate. Sustainability cannot be created with one-time appropriations and block grants that look good and generate good press, and again, for example, Science at Elementary and Classrooms for the Future, but which evaporate just as quickly, leaving a district to decide whether to raise taxes to continue them or eliminate them. Since the implementation of Act 1, raising taxes to continue these programs has become nearly impossible, and therefore most are eliminated despite showing great success in improving student achievement. Sustainable funding must come from a fair, consistent, and long-range budget plan and funding formula that take into account the needs of the children in each of our communities. I would like to thank you for your dedication to this important task and for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Bell, and I serve as the superintendent of the Hermitage School District. I have been a school administrator for 16 years, with 9 of those as a superintendent. Would like to thank Representative Mark Longgetti for the invitation to attend the hearing today and their commission for their willingness to hear our thoughts and concerns. Hermitage is a city of 16,000 residents, 20 miles south of our current location. Our school district serves almost 2,100 students, K-12, with a wide socioeconomic range. Fiscally, Hermitage is very conservative with total 2012-2013 expenditures of $12,261 per student. The 2012-13 Pennsylvania Department of Education annual financial report numbers show that our total per pupil expenditures are 413th out of the 500 school districts. 412 school districts spend more per student than we do. Academically, based on the school performance profile, we were ranked 95th out of 500 districts. To use a boxing term, we feel we punch above our weight. We are not satisfied with this ranking and are working daily to build upon our current academic successes. My first concern that has brought me here today is the overall level of funding of public education by the Commonwealth. I'm certain that you've heard this statistic numerous times before, but it bears repeating. Pennsylvania ranks 47th of the 50 United States in the level of state funding for public education, 47 out of 50. The Pennsylvania Department of Education assigns each school in our state letter grades for performance in numerous areas, including fiscal responsibility. I do not think there can be any doubt what the assigned grade would be for the entity that scored 47th out of 50. The Commonwealth pays for 34 cents of each dollar spent on education. The national average is 44. This lack of state funding support has caused our district, as well as others that you've heard, to make numerous reductions in staff and to raise local millage. If our great state would make the commitment to get to just the national average, a large portion of the need for us to be meeting today would be resolved. I would like to share changes in district funding from the state over the past 5 years for my district. Basic education funding, including the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, was at $5.824 million in 2009 and 10. This current year, we're at $5.672, which is a 5-year decrease of $151,000. Special education funding in 09-10 was at $1.101 million. In 2014-15, we're at $1.112, a a 5-year increase of $11,524. Transportation subsidy for our district in 09-10 was $520,000. In 14-15, it was $488,000, a 5-year decrease in transportation subsidy of $32,000. As you can see, the Commonwealth funding for our district has been stagnant or even reduced over the past 5 years. Commonwealth funding represents 37% of our total district revenue. When this is combined with steep increases in PSERS, health benefit cost increases, and modest inflation of wages and other expenditures, we are in a difficult situation that replays itself yearly during budget time in our district. Our district has responded to these fiscal challenges by executing the following strategies. We have cut 14 of 140 teaching positions, 2 administrators, 10 instructional aides, 3 nurses aides, 4 secretarial positions, as well as numerous athletic coaching positions. All district employees took a voluntary pay freeze. We have also cut the number of bus runs, and while we have trimmed every part of the budget, we have not yet had to cut any program from our district. Fiscally, we are very near the time when we will either need to raise millage significantly or make cuts in critical parts of our educational program. I do not see either of these, raising millage or making program cuts, as particularly good solutions. So I have 2 recommendations for the committee today from our school district. We are asking you to support a revenue strategy that levels out the fiscal responsibility of public education. The Commonwealth should recognize the need to raise the support level to 50%, accomplished during the 1970s, or at a minimum the national average of 44%. The current level of state funding is not supportive of our public education system. To maintain this anemic level of funding will continue to place pressure on local millage across the state. We have experienced 5 years of trimming the budget and reducing staff. Without a viable state fiscal plan for the future, we are burdened with only 2 options: cutting student programs and/or raising real estate millage. On the issue of a fair funding formula, fairness, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. My recommendation to the committee is to go back to the costing out study that was directed by the General Assembly, commissioned by the State Board of Education, and released as part of the governor's budget in 2008. We find that the study's use of base cost per modified average daily membership, adjusted for factors such as poverty, English language learners, size, and geographic cost, adequately addresses the requirements of a fair funding formula. We believe that the study findings were equitable, adequate, complete, and that now is the time to implement the plan. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today. You have a difficult and complicated task before you, and the Hermitage School District wishes you much success on a determination and implementation of our road forward. The youth of our city are our greatest resource, and they are counting on you. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brad Furco, and I would like to thank the Basic Education Funding Commission for the opportunity to testify today. I would also like to thank Representative Longetti for the invitation to speak. I'm currently the Superintendent of Schools for the Sharpsville Area School District. I have over 30 years in service to the public in education, and 10 of them have been as a superintendent. Sharpsville Area School District is located in Mercer County and has a population of approximately 1,300 students. We have a K-5 building and another building that is divided between a 6-8 middle school and a 9-12 high school. Our demographics support a 10% special education and 37% economically disadvantaged population. However, our high school has recently received the Silver Award from the Pittsburgh Business Times, and our middle school has received the Governor's Award due to the fact that the school scored above a 90 on the school performance profile. The citizens of Sharpsville, Clark, and South Pymatuming have chosen to take on much of the responsibility for paying for a local school due to the fact that they believe in the positives that a smaller school can provide. There is a certain pride that you hear in the voice of our community members and students all the way to first grade as they respond in unity and pride, "We are Sharpsville." However, recent cuts in public education and the burden of unfunded mandates are making smaller schools make choices that affect the lives of their students. For example, full-day kindergarten versus technology. It should be noted that Sharpsville area schools have only had district-wide wireless network since the beginning of this year. Elimination of class aides that support the hard work of our teachers and that provide an additional set of ears, eyes, and hands. Third, how do we fund the project-based assessment for students that have not met proficiency on the Keystone? Fourth, how do we update our buildings without the assistance of PlanCon? Fifth, how do we continue to update our curriculum so our students have a working knowledge of STEM or of STEAM, focusing on higher critical thinking skills and having all students proficient at levels 2, 3, and 4 of the depth of knowledge scale? Sharpsville Area School District has done many things that some would say are impossible. Through collaborations with our local union, our teachers have taken a pay freeze and concession on their health benefits. We have brought back programs for autistic students and emotional support students to our district, not only to save money, but because we believe that students should be educated in their neighborhood schools. Through this, we have also added AP courses, an IBOT program, and Zulama to our curriculum, but this has come at the cost of budget cuts in other areas. However, not only are we cutting the budget, we have also had to use more of our fund balance in order to make these programs a reality. It is imperative that the Commonwealth develop an educational funding formula that is, number one, fair and sustainable. 2, provides pension relief and reform. 3, addresses special education costs fairly and equitably. 4, removes unfunded mandates placed on school districts in the name of accountability. 5, addresses inequities in charter school funding and performance. If these challenges are not met by you as policymakers, the future is bleak for the small community schools. The needs of the children must be first in all of your minds, and an equitable educational funding formula provides a level playing field for all to benefit. I have never backed away from competition and would gladly place our students and staff next to any in the Commonwealth. Just imagine where we could go with equitable funding for all programs. There is just too much at stake. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you all for your testimony. I'll turn it to Representative Longetti for questions or comments.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Kelly, you talked a little bit about the transience issue in the Sharon City School District. And if you could perhaps describe in a little bit more detail the additional cost that you believe results from that and the additional challenges because students are moving in and out.
Absolutely. With the issue of transients, there's just the basic costs of additional materials, additional resources. Students need textbooks, students need workbooks. There's additional assessment and testing that has to take place with these students, because what we notice is most of the students who are in and out are moving from building to building, from district to district, and it is creating, it creates a situation in a classroom where we need to identify where these students have come from, track down their educational records. Our school psychologists are overwhelmed at times, particularly what we find beginning of the month, end of the month. As rent becomes due, the family can't pay the rent, they move to a new house, they move to a new community, and then we're charged with finding out, where those students have been, what resources they had. In a lot of the cases, the students are coming with individual education plans, and so there are additional special education costs that come with them, or they may have had special programs. A number of times this year, we've been approached and asked for hiring a full-time aide for a student who came to us mid-year. They were not planned for in the budget. We do have some contingency funds in our budget, but as you've heard from all 4 of the superintendents here, our budgets are so tight that those contingency funds are almost non-existent now. For example, just recently, within the last 2 weeks, we had a student transition into the district from another district, and we are required by his IEP to provide him with a full-time one-on-one aide. And that, for us, is about a $40,000, when you add health care and all the other benefits, about a $40,000 line item that we're going to be asking our board February or March to add that is not part of our budget. So that's just a single example, but that rate, and again, 1 out of every 3 of our students transitions in and out in 2 of our smaller elementary buildings.
Thank you. I know the other 3 school districts on the panel all have busing. Sharon does not. It's a walking district by and large. I know Hermitage particularly has a lot of geographical area. I imagine Greenville does too. If you could just talk a little bit about how we should look at transportation costs as we consider a formula. We've heard some testimony that from some schools that they really would like to see the transportation part of it continue just to be a separate piece. But if you could just perhaps shed some light on your thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree that I believe it should be continue to be addressed as a separate piece. My concern, as I mentioned, transportation in our cuts, we have cut down the number of buses that we've had, resulted in some very tight numbers on buses, but we've managed to stay in the requirements. The overall transportation subsidy, as I shared earlier, has decreased over 5 years. The cost of buses have not, and what bus drivers are paid, and we are catching a break with the fuel costs lately, but yeah, the keeping up with inflation on those items would be of much assistance. Because the subsidy does not keep up with inflation, I'm having to pull from other areas, instructional areas of the budget, to fill that gap, because we're committed to public transportation of our students.
Any of the other panelists care to comment on?
Just one comment in general about busing. We have probably 90% of our students, and we're slightly over 1,400, we have to provide a seat for in a bus. And that's a challenge we have. We have students who have a seat in the bus but never step foot on the bus. And if you were to look across the district, if there was some creative endeavors that we would have an opportunity to opt those students out, now would affect the funding, obviously, but we're providing buses sometimes, and I'm sure my colleagues are as well, that are half empty. But we have to have a seat on the bus for them, and that works out into, dollars that we might be able to use otherwise. So I know that's not directly tied to my colleague Dr. Bell's comment, but again, every student who is on the roll, who deserves transportation, has to have that seat, which, as I said, sometimes they never step foot on the bus.
Interesting information, particularly in light of what we read in the newspapers today about the airline industry and how they're maximizing and making sure that their planes are full, and yet your hands are tied on that issue. Just wanted to build a little bit on some of Mr. Ferrer's comments. It seems to me that each of you are trying to provide as best as you can a robust education for your students. Obviously, in these difficult fiscal times, it's very difficult to do that. And there has been some collaboration in Mercer County to try to achieve that. What are your reactions to, and I'm not sure how it relates exactly to our developing a funding formula, but I think it's important information for us in collaborative efforts to try to provide that robust education, and how dollars might be driven out for something like that. I'm kind of interested to hear from the other panelists. If anybody wants to take a stab at that.
While they collect their thoughts, I have one. In a previous assignment, my superintendency with the Sharon School District, we had a Chinese teacher that we funded in the neighboring district, as did Sharon. I believe we had that in place for nearly 3 years. It worked tremendously well. It was an example of cooperation, and then when the hammer hit and the funding cuts, that was one of the first things to go away. And those are the type of efforts that are possible, and again, it worked really well. It was a program, depending upon the district, it was at the elementary or secondary level, it was elective or exposure course, but that's one example. Neighboring districts working cooperatively, funding cuts came, goodbye.
I would also say, and Mr. Farrar highlighted this in his testimony, the districts work very collaboratively, and we work very well together. The Entrepreneurial Academy, I think, is probably the highlight that we're experiencing this year. 7 districts coming together with the intermediate unit, with the business community, and trying to develop a program that none of us individually could provide and offer. And I think we're at a position and we're at a point in the Shenango Valley in particular and in Mercer County in general where those types of programs work very well. And they need a little bit of seed money, but as I mentioned, they also need the sustainability. We can't put this program in, get it running, seeing the success, and then having to pull the plug because funding is cut or the seed money is cut from it. So, you know, those are some of the issues. But I think we work very well together. We work very well with our intermediate unit in some shared resources, some shared staffing, and I think that is a way and something that needs to be considered when you're looking at a funding of education.
And I would comment this way, when you look at certain positions, for example, speech therapists, and you look at school psychologists, those are very easy to share because you have somebody that may do 3 days in your district and 2 in another. Distance learning, as it made it possible, as Mr. Ferreira said, to offer certain courses, and as long as you make sure that you're within the collective bargaining agreement of your contract. So I believe that our districts do that. There are some savings to be had in shared resources, for example, if you're ordering something or as we look at our finances. So I think that's something that we're doing and that we're looking at. The IU has been a great place to look at starting to share programs. But once again, sometimes the IU price escalates where it is often cheaper to then just try to do it yourself and then share with the neighboring district also. And I would highlight to that, Representative Longetti, special education programs.
Just a final question. You know, as we look at the various factors involved, we're looking at student-based factors. Poverty's been discussed. That's been a constant theme in our hearings. We're also going to be looking at district-level factors. And I just wanted you to comment. You know, it seems like a no-brainer, but tax effort, should that be a district factor? And do you have any thoughts on what is a good measurement of local tax effort?
My quick comment on that would be to start with a look at per pupil spending, expenditures, total budget per pupil, and then work backwards from that on the local tax effort, state and federal tax effort.
I would be remiss because I think someplace I had it tattooed, so I made sure that I brought it up today. But you're talking about the tax effort, but then also, and I want to address this, the unfunded mandates. I mean, if you look at the number of mandates that the lawmakers have placed on school districts within the past 3 years, I mean, to be blunt and to be, I hope, passionate, I'm all for SLOs, okay? But what's the purpose? I'm all for keystone testing. But what are we going to do with those students that are not passing through the project-based assessment? Because the mandate says that we have to offer them so many years if they don't pass the keystone. All of these in the name of public education are great things as we look at accountability. But at the end of the day, that effort's going to come back on the individual school district. And we can share teachers as we look at doing remedial programs for kids with project-based assessment. But you add that to the SLOs, to the other things, to the new Danielson model for evaluation, and we all want the same thing. We all want high-quality teachers. We want kids that are coming out with knowledge, but then you do it based on a pen and pencil test when you want us to do STEAM and STEM. I mean, make the accountability relate to what's happening in the classroom and make the evaluation occur to what you want these students to be, what's coming on. So I think in a way we've looked so much at accountability, we're forgetting about instruction and how much are these mandates costing our taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Longetti. Representative Oberlander.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of questions as you're going through your testimony. I want to say, first of all, thank you for being here and thank you for the testimony. It is a difficult job, and I know when we had a hearing in my district, 3 school districts, you would have thought that we were in 3 different places in the Commonwealth. And I'm hearing some of that here today as well. I would like to talk a little bit about, I know that the Sharon School District, you talked about student movement. Can you talk about your population? Have you had declines across all 4 of these school districts over the past decade?
I'll speak to Sharon. Over the past decade, yes, we have seen population decline. Over the past 4 years, we've begun to see a trend of upward enrollments. We currently have a senior class, which is one of the smallest on record in Sharon, of 115 students. We also have first, second, and third grade classes of over 200. And the trend for those classes is growing. So we are seeing an increase in student population. Where that appears to be coming from, and I mentioned it in my testimony, is the conversion of single-family homes into rental properties that are then used by multiple families instead of just a single family. And so one home that used to have maybe 2 or 3 children living in it now have 6 or 7 children for multiple families living together. That seems to be an issue that we're finding in Sharon. We are not back to the levels of population of 10 years ago, but our trend is now reversing, and we appear to be growing rather than losing population.
In Greenville, yes, over the last decade, we have lost students. The last 3 or 4 years have been fairly stable.
Okay.
In Sharpsville, we've seen, similar to Sharon, we have seen a decline, but yet within the last couple of years, we have seen a growth. But our probably biggest change has been going from, within the last 5 to 6 years, a 22% free and reduced lunch economically disadvantaged now to 37%. So that's where we're seeing that growth.
And Hermitage School District has been stable for the past 10 years, and predictions are that it'll continue at the same enrollment.
Okay. Several of you also mentioned your fund balances. Do you have large fund balances? And I know that's relative. I'm not really sure what large means. So let's say $3 million or more.
At Greenville, we follow the recommended balance by PD. We're in the 5 to 8% range. But much of that has been earmarked for healthcare, PSERS. So at least 2/3 of and we're nearly at $6 million. But again, 2/3 of that is committed. And without that money, and again, to the credit of the previous board and previous administration, I said I've only been there for 18 months. They saw it coming, so they built for it. But we've not had the tax increase, I believe, in Greenville in the last 2 years, but more than likely we'll be considering one this year. But again, without those foresight of the board, we'd be in much dire straits. Again, healthcare and PSERS are earmarked for our fund balance, along with capital improvement projects that we're in the middle of right now.
We also were with a $15 million budget, around the 5 to 7%, but we've probably used over the past 2 years $250,000 from our fund balance, which to pay for those costs that Mr. Ferreira has addressed. We've addressed it with our board that if we continue our current spending, we will be broke in 5 years. So we've also developed other ways, and I think Mr. Bell has addressed many of the ways that we look at, but that's kind of tough when you're looking at PSERS at between a 21 to 25% rate. So with that, we're trying to maintain as fiscally responsible fund balance as we can, but we're not near $3 million.
We are above the 3 million mark. We do also average between the 5 and 8% that's recommended as a district. We have in the last 2 years used over $3 million of fund balance to balance our budgets. So thankfully we have it. Most of our current fund balance is designated. Ours is probably 3/4, and it's designated for healthcare increases, PSERS increases that we know, and also for capital projects for building repairs that we have known have been coming for a while. So we've been building the fund balance so that we have to do those building renovations and repairs.
Ours is above 3 million also, and to not reiterate, but it is associated or categorized for specifically our largest fund balance amount is for PSERS increases that we're absorbing, as
Thank
is
you.
the state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wheatley, for Chairman Roebuck.
I find it interesting, this is like the second or third hearing we've had where superintendents have brought up the idea of seed money, of trying to collaborate. We also hear a lot from members and from the public about why don't we consolidate schools? And so what do you think of the idea, kind of along the lines of perhaps, get your comments on this, of obviously this commission is dealing with just the funding formula, but perhaps a complement to that would be some sort of recommendation to look at that idea or to actually call for a separate line item, if you will, seed money, that would go out to school districts to do things that not only would perhaps obviously improve performances, but also would save money in terms of school districts, make it more efficient. So what I would appreciate, what I think would be useful to the commission on that point is, obviously you've talked about a bunch of these collaborative agreements. I think it would be useful to get some specific, obviously some of it has been talked about today, but to get some specific on paper what those have involved, what they've involved in terms of savings to your school districts in particular. I think there's also a lot of members who've expressed interest in, once again, not necessarily they're for consolidation, but ways that school districts can work together to save money. And also improve improve their program. So any information you might have about all these various programs that you've clearly been working together with, that would be useful in really focusing on how is it, not only how has it improved, but also how it has saved money. And then that way you can justify the seed money and as well as hopefully continued money for these programs. So if you didn't know if you want to comment on that or if that information is available.
Just one quick comment. There's a perfect example 60 miles south of here where Center and Monaca combined, but they did it to benefit each district. It was perfectly, I guess, the perfect storm. Center actually surrounds Monaca, and if you follow the athletic arena, they have several state championships since they've combined, coincidentally or not. I do know the superintendent there quite well, and he said they've saved 50 positions through attrition between their efforts. I think it's feasible. It's not feasible in every district throughout the state. It absolutely is not. But case by case, I think it should be looked at. I think it's an opportunity. Here at Greenville, we'll have a meeting tonight. If you get stranded in town, you're welcome to come back. We're having a public hearing on our elementary schools. Currently, we have a K-3 building and then a 4, 5, and 6 building, which is referred to as the East Building, which is about 53 years old. And depending upon what options you consider with our feasibility study, we're anywhere from 8 to 11 million to rehab that building, and you're still going to still have an old building. There are some neighboring districts 6 miles away that are in similar straits. Again, I may not be popular for saying this, but let's at least talk about it. The state has limited resources. For the state to give Greenville $20 million, which may or may not happen, and to give a neighboring district that amount or more probably isn't going to happen real quick. As I said earlier in my testimony, the hardest animal to kill in Pennsylvania is a school mascot. I can't take credit for that. My colleague John Sarandry can. Thank you, John. But it's worth considering. It absolutely is. Dollars are tight. The good thing in Greenville, we aren't broke yet. Our board did commit $500,000 of our fund balance for this year, and we're looking at a tax increase for next year. But absolutely, my dad had a saying, many hands make the load lighter, and this is an opportunity to make that load lighter. No one will be in favor of it, but if we at least talk about it, and if we could get the state to say, here's $10 million, what, again, one-time seed money, how could you use that to do something collectively and jointly to benefit kids? I'm willing to do it. Again, we have to kill that mascot in a positive way. So at least thank you for considering and bringing it up. I know it's a delicate subject. In some communities, it wouldn't work. I went back and I looked through the Standard & Poor's study that was conducted, I think, in 2006, and a lot of information there. In some districts, it could be a perfect match. In others, it wouldn't work. But shame on us for not trying it. I'm a guy that says the glass is half full rather than half empty. So let's talk about it. Let's look at it. Let's see what we could do collectively together to benefit all kids.
In kind of referencing what we've talked about today, I don't know that we're going to say we're going to see significant cost savings with the STEM Academy or with sharing the Chinese teacher. What we're seeing is the opportunity to provide world-class educational opportunities to our children. There is no way, in my opinion, that any one of our 4 districts would be able to have our own STEM or STEAM academy. But working collectively with all 7, we're able to offer that to our students, and we have 25 students that are experiencing that, with the possibility and the projection to grow that as we grow. The same with the Mandarin Chinese initiative. Sharon on her own would not have been able to hire a Mandarin Chinese teacher and offer that to our students. But working collectively with Mr. Ferrara in Sharpsville, we were able to do that. So it saved us half a position, but it also afforded us the opportunity to offer our students that language, that world language, that we would not have been able to had we not worked collaboratively.
Thank you, and thank you all for your participation today. I too had to reiterate the commentary of my colleague, Representative Oberlander. It is amazing that we have to accommodate not only the diversity of Pennsylvania, but the diversity just within one region in order to make sure that the formula works. I have the same situation in Lehigh County. You know, I have pretty much a prototype of Pennsylvania within one county. You know, large urban center with surrounding suburbs and rural areas, and to try to promulgate and establish and promulgate a formula that accommodates that is difficult. But Mr. Kayla, you, in terms of your testimony, you started off exactly where we need to start off, and that is just some fundamental objectives, and that is, you know, the disparities amongst districts need to be addressed. Predictability in funding needs to be addressed, and sustainability, which is something that just our history shows over my 20 years, never mind going back, has been a real challenge. There's often information that's talked about in the context of Pennsylvania's place in funding education in terms of where we stand in percentages. For our task, it's important for us to get into that a little deeper, because if we just go off of aggregate percentage and don't look at specifics, it becomes very difficult to be effective. Often the statistic that Pennsylvania sits 47th based on an aggregate percentage of 34% support needs to also accommodate the fact that there's some districts that receive 80% of their support from the state and some receive 15. So if we don't get deeper into that and just look at 50%, what would it mean to get that district that's at 15, that's spending at $22,000 a child up to 50? That needs to be, those differences need to be accommodated. Where Pennsylvania sits in overall spending nationwide is 6th or 7th. Where we have a real challenge is disparity, because there's some districts spending at 22, but some spending at 7. And we either facilitate that through our formulas and primarily through our formulas. But there always is an interest in accommodating local districts and how they would like to accommodate their students themselves in terms of their own spending decisions. And a lot of this conversation is about allocation, but it's refreshing, and this hasn't come up as much over our 12 hearings, is how do we use this conversation to accommodate collaboration? If we provide additional resources, does it promote that type of activity? What was presented to us today is that collaboration, I believe, maybe not in this region, but other regions, needs to be directed. That just a aggregate funding formula where dollars are distributed either student-based or district-based, wouldn't accommodate that. It would need to be in some kind of separate allocation that has parameters around it that would encourage districts to collaborate. There's many, many different opinions regarding how the state should, in its General Appropriations Act in funding education, how it should accomplish their goals. Should we accomplish it through a overall formula where districts individually can set their own goals and standards and performance standards for the children, or should we have, like Florida has, a lot of different categories where the state really determines a lot of the decision-making by its categorical allocation of dollars? In your experience in your relationship to the state and your autonomy in your own decision-making, let's talk about collaboration. Is it better for us to foster collaboration in the provisions of education services in this region through a line item separate from the formula that has those parameters around it, use it for collaboration and collaboration type initiatives, or could we provide for that just in a formula that promotes greater equity, greater dollars and greater equity, that you can make those decisions without those parameters? Just any comments you have on that? Many of you have talked about collaboration here.
Thank you. I think that you should provide dollars to provide an incentive for collaboration, but make them sustainable.
But that has to be in a separate line item.
Yes, I would say that, but then you're providing, for example, as a single A, 1,300 school sitting with a double A and a triple or a quad, I feel like I'm kind of the sacrificial lamb up here. Like, why isn't Sharpsville collaborating? I mean, I feel like running to West Middlesex when I get home. But what I guess I'm saying is, though, rather than coming down with a mandate, make it an incentive-based and then make the money sustainable. And Mr. Ferreira brought up the Central Valley. I believe that's what they're called. It comes to mind the Duquesne McKeesport solution or whatever that was. And I think that that would be more palatable than if we're going to get into forced, and politically probably better than if you get into forced mandates. But there are opportunities, if there are seed monies that are sustainable, that are provided, that especially in the district of how many square miles where you have Sharon, Farrell, Sharpsville, Greenville, West Middlesex, and some odd Reynolds, and they're all sitting back there, and I hope I didn't leave any out. But you have those opportunities. But an incentive-based, I think, would be as a separate line on where you could take advantage that tied to a grant or something like that would be an excellent opportunity. Because I think those opportunities are out there and are being currently used.
And some of the policy coming out of Harrisburg, consistent with what you were talking about, is the increased exposure by students for STEAM and STEM education. You know, there's differences in opinion of whether we in Harrisburg should provide that and encouraging that through a separate allocation outside of a formula, that we would need to do that in order to make sure that it is accommodated locally. What is your opinions on that? Could we, assuming a student-based funding formula, in other words, for all students having access to STEM, accommodating that in the allocation and then allowing districts to put together their own parameters and their own programs, because anything that's through a separate appropriation is going to have parameters. This is what you need to do with the money, rather than a district developing their own initiative in that. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my response to that, it kind of, to me, is like the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing, because the PA Core should address the issues of STEM and STEAM as you relate to making the proficiency marks. And believe me, I'm not talking about the pen and pencil. I'm talking about the higher critical thinking skills that's being espoused by the Department of Education through the change of the PSSA to depth of knowledge level 2, 3, and 4. So that should all be an inherent with what everyone in this room is doing. And I could talk to any of my colleagues, and what they're saying is we're all looking at instruction and curriculum. And I think that can be a piece of the incentive. And I think because students are going to benefit. I think there's also another piece of the incentive piece as we look at collaboration. Collaboration with industry, collaboration with higher education. Those are two areas where I know that recently in our area, our VOTEC and our IU have done a great job in making sure that our kids are collaborating with people in Greenville or those people that have those businesses, so our kids have an opportunity to go into these and local jobs stay local and people stay in the Sharpsville of the area so we don't become the sacrificial lamb. So I guess that's what I'm saying. I think there's a lot of opportunities for incentive that provides economic opportunities, not 5 years down the line, 10, 20, and 30 as people do the living and dying and buying houses and those things in Pennsylvania, and collaborations through those programs, which keeps local jobs local and keeps our kids local because they're our future. I know that's an overused cliche, but I think that's how I would recommend to set them up, because we do work amongst ourselves and we do share those things. But I'm going to bring up CFF. I loved CFF, but then when the money dried up, you know, thankfully we still don't have Ataris or Mac 64 sitting in our building, because for some of those, the reality is the technology budgets dried up, and then that's what took away some of the funding. Took away some of the fund balance because you had to update that technology. So I like the idea of the incentive funding, but I like it looking at a lot of different streams, including relationships with business, but also collaborations among superintendents.
I would agree with Dr. Furco, because year to year things change. And, you know, look at the gas well possibilities in our region. You know, 5 years ago, they didn't exist. They're here, they're real. That's an industry that we could collaborate with, and who knows the possibilities. So thank you, Dr. Furco. Good comments.
Dr. Brown, I want to say I agree with both of your positions. I think for mandated services and mandated issues, Common Core and full-day kindergarten, those types of scenarios, that needs to be part of the basic funding formula. We know what the research is. We know what the research is saying. So if it's going to be something that we as a Commonwealth are going to initiate, then it needs to be part of a basic funding formula. On the other hand, there are things that regionally we can collaborate on with a little bit of money and a little bit of initiative. And I don't think any of us are afraid of those parameters as long as we know what they are up front and we know that they don't change. The frustration for us as districts is sometimes, you know, Dr. Furco mentioned Classrooms for the Future. You know, a great initiative, and we poured a lot of resources into it, and then it's gone. And then you look at, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of training and equipment that we just can't sustain. So, you know, there needs to be that balance of, yes, basic funding for those mandated, critical, research-proven initiatives, and then maybe a little pool of funding for those things that we'd like to try, but we just don't have that extra resource for.
Just based on our history, all right, mine. Predictability and sustainability in regards to separate line items for separate issues, separate initiatives is where, more so I believe in the actual funding formula, where sustainability and predictability has been a problem, because we've rolled through administrations, different initiatives, different priorities, and then you change administrations, you change dynamics within the legislature, these things go away. So that's one of the challenges with that approach, is that incentive through a line item rather than just some overall model of funding where accommodations are made and decisions are made locally. So just wanted to give you at least my background in going in that direction. Two last things. We would like to build a funding model that matches the decision-making that is done at the local level in regards to accommodating, allocating dollars to student need. That's part of our conversation, that our overall model matches what you do in allocating dollars internally. And one of the issues that comes up constantly, and it's part of our actually statutory charge, is poverty. Different elements of poverty, the fact that you normally would, to address issues of poverty, have to allocate dollars additionally within your budgeting to accommodate those students. Is that something that, in regards to your individual budgeting decisions, that you could separate out and determine that an additional component of your funding for a certain student is higher than a student that is not in poverty? part of the challenge with our doing that in a formula is to provide an additional weight for that accommodation. So that's something within your own budgeting you could do and actually separate out and provide information as to, just on a general basis, how much you would additionally have to spend to accommodate in children in poverty to meet standards, I guess.
That's an interesting point. I don't know how you would go about doing that. You know, as I mentioned, we're 29% of our children living in poverty. Because of that, we ensure that we have a nurse in every building. We have 2 at the high school. We are providing daily triage. Parents send their children to school, and even though they're sick, and say, go see the nurse. And the nurse will give you an aspirin, the nurse will give you whatever is needed. We bring in resources like dentists, and I can't remember the name of the program, where they're actually volunteers who come in and provide free dental care and free eyeglasses to our children. But to split it out, you know, child A versus child B, I think would be extremely difficult. Providing, you know, meals, breakfast, lunch, snacks, fresh fruit and vegetable programs. We're trying to do a lot of those things. I think it'd be extremely difficult on an individual basis.
I understand our point in regards to what we're trying to attempt here. Based on the diversity of Pennsylvania, some districts have, in accommodating those issues, have a lot higher percentage of children in poverty than others, have to spend more to accommodate those interests than others. And it would be helpful to have information to determine what that internal allocation is for those children so that the formula could accommodate that. It's really an activity-based funding model that requires you to allocate those dollars for those aggregate costs that you expend towards those students. And I know it's easier said than done. I understand that. But I always like to ask that question because we'd like to use the experience of our local districts who are putting together budgets to accommodate this in pulling together a model.
We would gladly share our numbers, but like I said, it would be difficult, I think, to identify, you know, a student of poverty versus a student not, and ferret out all of the money that goes specifically to one versus the other. I think because those resources are available to everybody. We put that nurse there specifically because we have a high-need population, but that nurse is also available to all of the other students in that day, and that's where I think you would have some of the difficulty. But again, our numbers would be there, and maybe what you could do would be to look at, you know, a district similar to Sharon, which is in that bottom 5% of poorest districts, and maybe a comparative district that may be a little higher, and see where those numbers balance themselves out.
And yet, Senator Brown, you might be able to do that by using the SPP data of historically underperforming groups, because that does include economically disadvantaged, as well as there's a strong correlation between economically disadvantaged and special education numbers, and also, if you look in some districts, between economically disadvantaged and discipline. So I brought this up in my testimony. When the time comes for the project-based assessment, you will be able to tie the number that you're spending for extra tutoring and extra services, thank you, Mr. Ferrer, for those students who are in that historically underperforming category as it relates to the tutoring services, so that they don't go on the 10% naughty list that we have to turn into the state for passage of the Keystone, because we know that life without a high school diploma makes it harder in order to get gainful employment. So I think that in the coming years, we will be able to use that data for decision-making that you can see, to see just the effect that the poverty has on what services we have to provide. And I don't know if my colleagues agree with that or not, but I know that's how we would use it, and that's how we have used it.
That's perfect. Thank you. It's perfect. Just one last, I guess, question or comment. Dr. Furco, the commentary regarding the costing out approach, the cost-based model for funding, something that's come up during many of our hearings. In regards to that model, do you know what, for your school district, what the adequacy gap was? Do you recall what it was?
No, offhand, I don't. I could get that to you.
Okay. In consultation on that model, one of the things that comes up that creates some issues is when a district on a cost-based approach rather than revenue-based approach is spending, when we initiate the model, above the adequacy number at a local level. There is some suburban, some urban districts, even districts, large urban districts with a lot of need that were spending above the number. How do you implement the model for districts like that? How do you communicate to the district that if you're doing a cost-based model, you're funding based on that, cost above adequacy, that there's no additional state support coming? And if there is state support coming, where does it go? You had mentioned you compare cost to educate against tax effort. What is recommended in that regard is you use additional allocation in that model, if you go to that model, and use it to reduce local tax effort. Because the assumption is that in order to get to that spending, the local tax effort is higher than other places. Would you, if in that conversation regarding that model, would you agree with that? Say, for example, your district was spending above the adequacy number. Our people would have to come to you and say, well, we can't provide any more funding to your district because you're above where the model says you should be spending to get more.
Yes.
That if it comes to you, it has to go to reducing your local tax burden.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
I would,
Okay.
and that comes from we're 413 out of 500 in
Understand.
spending per pupil. So
Understand.
it would be, I think that would be an interesting conversation. I know the taxpayers in those districts where you used it reduced millage would be very excited about the prospect of that, but
Well, that messaging in regards to even the consideration of that model needs to be consistent, because what we
Yes.
tend to get is districts saying, well, I know we're spending above it, but we still have to advocate for our kids, we would like you to provide more funding to the district, and then it falls apart.
could that situation be optional in a conversation with the school district and the community of an acknowledgement of we're spending above adequacy, and that through the school board, which is elected to make those decisions, do we keep maintaining that level of funding to provide services above the adequate level, or do we return it to the taxpayer?
It'd be an interesting conversation.
I'd like to be in the room.
So would I. Gentlemen, thank you for all your assistance today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are running behind schedule. I apologize for that. But we'd like to continue on our agenda if we can, to stay as close as possible. Next on our agenda is Jerome Sasala?
Sasala.
Sasala, sorry, okay. Is acting superintendent of the Austin Area School District. Mrs. Sasala, thank you for your participation.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to tell the story of Pennsylvania's smallest public school. I will be speaking today for our school specifically, but also for many other rural schools, and also for the Pennsylvania State Land Tax Fairness Coalition that was started by our county commissioners because they realized the problem we have with our school funding. You do have the maps that I provided in the testimony. Mr. Wisner, he has some. Would you see that they have one, please?
There it is. Got it.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to this commission. My name is, you mentioned, is Jerry Sasala, Acting Superintendent of Pennsylvania's smallest public school district, the Austin Area District, covering 228 square miles of mountainous terrain. We are located in Potter County in what is possibly the most remote and mountainous area of our state. Incidentally, Potter County has 78% of the families living at 300% of the poverty level. That is the level where children are at high risk of school failure. We have one building housing 216 students, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, with a total budget of just over $4 million. With your permission, today I would like to address 5 issues that we believe must be taken into account when constructing the formula for educational funding. These include the remoteness of the area, the ability to fund education locally, unique problems we encounter, the programs we have initiated to overcome these problems, and lastly, the results we have achieved. Before I begin, I would like to impress 2 thoughts upon you. 1, we do experience frugal use of the limited resources we have available. We are not complaining. We are more concerned, however, with our second belief, that being we cannot consolidate effectively without serious injury to our students' futures. The first of the issues concerns the remoteness of our area. I want to draw your attention to the map I have provided. The map is of Potter County, where there are 5 school districts. The area outlined in red is the Austin district. As you look at the map, the area in white is taxable land, the blue is reduced taxes, and the green is state-owned land. Potter County has 268,176 acres of state-owned land. 112,728, or 42% of the state land, is located in the Austin area alone. So as you can see, only 10% of our district has taxable land. The rest is state land from which we receive $1.20 per acre. A mill in our district raises $30,000. We are presently taxed at 46 mills, the highest allowable by law. The point being that although millions of dollars of revenue are generated by the lumber and gas industries, these monies are distributed throughout the state with very little coming back to our area. 55% of our funding comes from the state, but 90% of the land is state-owned. When constructing a formula, our inability to fund the schools with local taxes must be considered, in our opinion. Coupled with this is the reality that our special education budget is $515,000 this year, 1/8 of our budget. Since I began 3 years ago, our special education budget has increased dramatically, with an increase of over $100,000 just this year. The loss of revenue from the state-owned land is over $500,000 per year. The third issue, being unique problems that rural schools encounter, is connected to the first problem of remoteness. Transportation through mountainous areas in winter presents one of these. Consolidation with a neighboring district would add 45 minutes to even the closest school. We feel that an hour and 45 minutes one way on a bus is too long for any child. Another unique problem with rural schools is there are sometimes very few businesses to rely on for help, and also a lack of social services to rely on. Consequently, like many other schools, we have developed a make-do, no-frills, only the essentials needed attitude toward everything that we do. In spite of these shortcomings, we have partnered with local industries to fund a state-of-the-art STEM lab in our school. Our area is experiencing a serious shortfall of skilled labor to replace the retiring baby boomers in our industries. We have met with industry leaders, government officials, and other educators to find a way to develop these skills while still maintaining our educational curriculum. This year, we have initiated project-based learning that is reaping many unexpected benefits. We also assembled a team from our school and intermediate unit and traveled to the West Point Military Academy's engineering department to seek their help in developing a successful STEM program. Consequently, our small school won the local STEM competition last year and traveled to Harrisburg, where we received an honorable mention at the state level. We also developed a robotics team in partnership with Williams Gas to create a solution to a hazardous spill scenario using robots that contain the toxic materials. This year, we were one of 88 schools out of 3,000 that were recognized as a reward school for our school performance profile scores. We were also one of 96 schools selected by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, Division of Federal Programs, to be recognized at the Title I Improving Schools Performance Conference as a Title I Distinguished School for the 2014-15 school year. We are also ranked number 89 out of the 459 Pennsylvania schools based on test scores in math and English. These results were possible because we have a dedicated staff and receive grant monies that enable us to change the way we teach based on how students learn. The main change came from trainings we underwent through the Keystones to Opportunity Grant that 52 schools in Pennsylvania were awarded. I will not elaborate about what we have changed in the interest of time, but will welcome any questions you may have. Our unique problems then boil down to this: distance to travel, time to travel, geographic features such as mountain and snow, and the inability to fund adequately because of state-owned property. We have also experienced the 7th highest decrease in aid ratio funding in the state over the past 10 years. In spite of this, we still feel we are getting excellent results as economically and efficiently as possible. In closing, I would like to leave you with a few thoughts. It has been said that kids who are loved at home come to school to learn. Kids who are not come to school to be loved. Based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, we have initiated extraordinary measures to ensure our children have their basic needs met, so we even have the opportunity to educate them. We feel that our success is because we know our kids and their families. In our case, being small is the key to our success. We have developed a motto within our staff that was based on the hedgehog concept from the book From Good to Great. The question is not how small is too small. The question for us is, how big is too big to provide the essential needs of our children? As we see it then, there are 4 major problems and 4 possible solutions. Problem 1, districts have different costs based on the cost of providing services in their region. The solution, a formula should be based on enrollment plus weighted supplements, which include many of the things spoken of today: sparsity of the area, the poverty of the area, the aid ratio based on a district's ability to pay, and distance and travel difficulties. Problem 2, which was also mentioned today, mandated costs exceed districts' revenue capabilities. The solution, once the state demands that districts meet certain standards, the costs must be funded by the state if the district is incapable of raising the revenue. Problem 3, household wealth and local tax challenges limit the quality of education in some districts. A possible solution, a district's foundation share would be based on its ability to pay and capped at a rate equal to its millage received in actual dollars. In our case, that equates to $30,000 times 46 mills, or only $1,380,000 in tax revenue. The rest must be supplied by our state, since the majority of the property is state-owned land. Problem 4, disparity between districts' wealth permits some to have lavish accommodations while others are not able to meet even the basic needs. The solution, districts that can afford better facilities for their children should have that option, but not from the basic cost per student formula. That should be funded by the ability to fund those initiatives locally. We are not looking for equality with richer areas. We are looking for equity. So I would entertain any questions that you may have that I hope I may be able to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Longetti.
Speaking of difficult terrain and travel, thank you for traveling out.
You're welcome.
And I appreciate you identifying problems and identifying for your perspective some possible solutions to those problems. Very helpful. And from what I hear, you're saying that we need to look at, tell me if I'm wrong, we need to look at districts that have tax-exempt properties, or in your case, I guess it's not completely tax-exempt, but it's capped at a very low level. Is that what I'm hearing you saying?
Yes. In fact, our commissioners, as I mentioned, are introducing legislation right now. It helps the municipalities. It helps everything in a county, of course, if that is raised. We call it the PILT, or Pilot Payment in Lieu of Taxes, of course. I'm not going to say we're coming against opposition, but everybody that looks at it and looked at the map I presented said, you know, we agree with you. We do want to fund our own schools, but not at the expense of someone else. We think there is a fairness issue here. Raising that, what the legislators have told us, yes, we agree, but we don't think we're going to vote for it because it's taking money from our own districts. I don't know how to get around that. They agree it's fair, but not sure that it's going to be voted for. So that has been our emphasis right now, to try to get some help there.
But at least as we look at a formula, and if we're looking at district-level weights, that something that we could consider in it is districts that have a significant percentage of either tax-exempt properties or, as you indicate, with estate lands.
Right, as you look at having 10%, it's almost impossible to fund your school without state help. And the reason I brought up consolidation is that's what everybody says, why don't you consolidate? Well, if you're in a urban area where there are two schools that are half full, 5 blocks apart, it makes sense, I'm all for it. When you have to travel an hour and 45 minutes at a bus in bad weather, it's impossible. Dr. Pamela Lenz, who sits over here, is a member of your committee as a circuit rider. She visited our school and said to us, I understand now, I had to come and see this. And she gave us probably one of the greatest compliments we've ever had. She said, I would like my granddaughter to go to this school. The most precious thing I have, I would send her here after she visited. So thank you, Dr. Lentz.
Yeah, and just for your information, we did hear some testimony, I think when we were in Representative Oberlander's district, of this similar challenges that, you know, somebody who doesn't dig into it might say, well, consolidate the school, until you realize kids are going to be on buses for extraordinary lengths of time just because the way the area is laid out and where people live, and it just really isn't a practical solution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Your situation and dynamics of your district are one of those situations, similar to some, that it is a challenge to make sure that the district-based factors that some of which we've had for a long time, properly accommodate the ability for your district to have the financial wherewithal to provide its services. The one that's been the most sustainable, if there's anything that's been sustainable in our funding models, is this aid ratio, which is our determination of relative wealth. We have a lot invested in it. A separate agency that is prime charge is provide the information that's necessary to build the aid ratio. And you were talking about fairness and just making sure that your district receives its fair relative share. Now, I haven't looked at the aid ratio specific for your district, but I would expect, given the fact that tax-exempt property is not included in market value in that calculation, that your relative market value as a component of that, which is 60% of the total calculation, is very low.
It's very low.
I'm not sure how your personal income wealth offsets that. But do you know, without me, I can find out, I can go look in terms of where that puts your district relative to others. What is your current aid ratio that's in the formula? Do you know that?
It's 0.36. We have, well, that is our, no, I'm sorry, that is our value, the property value. If it's worth $100,000 across the state, it's $36,000 in our district. Our aid ratio, yeah, I have it here.
All right. It's not a big deal, I can find it. I would expect, given the dynamics, you don't really know until you look in detail and.
0.529.
Okay.
Decrease of 16% over the last 5
You
years. I'm
think
sorry.
that the personal income piece of that, and we're looking, within our own conversations that component of our formula that's been around a long time and how it needs to change, or needs to change to accommodate a better funding model. And we've received a lot of input regarding whether market value should still sit at 60%. Does it appropriately determine a district's ability to raise local revenue? We've had a lot of conversation over 20 years is that property wealth is not the best determination, that it's more cash flow and people's personal income. But I would expect, just, based on what you're telling me, that if you're sitting in an aid ratio at that level, that your individual dynamics are not appropriately accommodated in that aid ratio. I would expect that if 90% of your property value is tax exempt and not in that calculation, it would be a lot higher.
Right.
There's something that relative wealth calculation needs to accommodate districts like yours. And that's part of the thing that we're doing, is making sure that happens. Because then if we don't, and make sure that those unique situations are accommodated, the formula becomes not sustainable, because eventually it falls apart because you can't defend it. So,
Exactly.
interesting. Collaboration is something that you do with other districts. The consolidation issue, I hear you, in terms of distance between schools. Putting a child on a bus for an hour and 45 minutes, I can't sit on a bus for an hour and 45 minutes, It's never about a young child. But the collaboration amongst districts in your county, is that something that can allow you to share administrative services and others?
Yes, in fact, we're doing that right now. I talked about the STEM lab that we are putting in. That we were contacted by our education council in the county. They said, could we use your school as a host site for the whole county for a summer STEM lab? Yes, we'd be glad to do that. We have an education council in our community. We collaborate with everything. For sports, my son played for the neighboring district, Connersport, played football there. My daughter was the drum major for another district. So we do that. Our golf person was a district champion, played for another district. We do have a basketball team, because we are able to get 5 people out at least. If there was a way we could do it easier, we would have done it.
Understand.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today.
All right.
Thank you. We're going to need to take, a 5-minute break in order to accommodate some technical issues. See if we can accommodate our folks in Harrisburg in regards to their participation. We'll be right back. So back on our agenda, next to testify is Jeremy Resnick, Executive Director and Founder of Propel School Foundation, and Michael Gentile, CEO of Keystone Charter School. Thank you, gentlemen. If you can maintain your commentary to 10 minutes so we can stay on schedule, we'd appreciate it. 10 minutes apiece. Thank you.
Yep. Hello, members of the commission and others. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Jeremy Resnick, and I'm a co-founder and leader at Propel Schools. Propel is a nonprofit organization with the mission of transforming public education in Western Pennsylvania. And for us, that means we want our region to be one in which every family, regardless of where they live, has access to a quality public school that meets the needs of their children. And obviously for many families, that's already the case. Many families already have access to good public schools. But for many others, and particularly those who happen to be poor, black and brown, this is not the case. And our goal has been to do something about that. We opened our first school in the Mon Valley in 2003, and we now operate 10 public charter schools in Allegheny County, serving 3,500 children. 3/4 are economically disadvantaged, 2/3 African American, 15% have a disability that requires specialized instruction. We're very proud of the student outcomes at our schools. Our students are 30% more likely to be achieving at grade level than their peers in district-run schools. And for students in historically underperforming subgroups, the advantage of attending Propel is even greater. We have more than 3,000 families on waiting lists for our schools, and our commitment to them is to grow until it propels schools accessible to all families who need it and want it. Since our organization operates charter schools, I feel it's necessary to address some of the noise that many hear about the impact of charter schools. Critics of charter schools are quick to complain that charters are receiving too much funding, even though by law we receive less revenue per pupil than school districts. And they also cite charter schools as the main culprit behind school district budget shortfalls. Why do I call this noise? Because it puts money at the center of a conversation rather than educational opportunity. Taxpayers are not paying their school taxes so that adults can get a paycheck. They're paying their taxes so that the next generation of Pennsylvanians will have the opportunity to get a great education. And a conversation about public education that is centered on money is a conversation about adults rather than children. I'm not saying that money is irrelevant. Whenever we see some children failing to receive a quality public education, we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to ensure that funding disparities are not the cause of the problem. However, we have to look beyond funding if we're serious about every child getting a first-class education. There are cases of schools serving demographically similar students, operating with very similar resources, but achieving very different results. Similarly, there are huge disparities in spending among schools that are getting comparable outcomes with demographically similar students. Money is not everything. When the conversation's focused on educational opportunity, brick and mortar charter schools are clearly a net positive for the Commonwealth. I know you've already heard about the positive performance of charters relative to district schools in Philadelphia. And in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, we're also seeing charter schools, brick and mortar charter schools outperforming. There's a chart with my testimony that shows the school performance profile numbers for all schools in Allegheny County, where more than 60% of the children are eligible for free and reduced price lunches. And as you can see there, charter schools are clearly clustered toward the top. We've all seen reports that claim to disparage Pennsylvania charter school performance, but these aren't apples to apples comparisons. They lump together cyber schools with brick and mortar charter schools, and they gloss over significant demographic differences that distinguish Pennsylvania's charter school students from Pennsylvania students at large. Charter schools tend to serve a much more disadvantaged student population. And it's worth noting in that chart with the bars, the lowest two performing charter schools on that chart. One of them serves adjudicated youth, and the other was closed this year because of low performance. In contrast to failing district schools that continue to suck in public funds year after year, when a charter school's performance is unsatisfactory, there's a clear path to closure. And so why are most charter schools doing well? It's not because they're charter schools. It's because they have the freedom to do things that children from resource-poor communities need, and because they're actually doing those things effectively. We're investing more in training teachers. We're extending the length of the school day and the school year. We're partnering with community-based organizations. And of course, we have real accountability. Unlike district schools, we face the real threat of closure if we do not perform. So against that backdrop, here are just a couple thoughts on the basic education funding. First, put all available dollars into the basic education budget. It's tempting to think that creating special restricted funding programs will help the General Assembly ensure that state funds are used effectively. But there's no way for the state legislature to earmark special funds in a way that meets the needs of every district. We've heard the commentary from the past panels. It would be better to give districts as much flexibility as possible, challenge them to be good stewards of precious resources, and hold them accountable for results. Where schools are not performing acceptably despite the investment of state funds, which is certainly the case for a number of public schools, the state needs to take decisive action, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But the funding formula itself can't be a tool for accountability. Secondly, the formula should be student-based to the maximum extent possible, and money should follow the student. Pennsylvanians pay their taxes to educate the next generation, not to fund schools. So funds allocated should be driven by the needs and number of students wherever possible. Some districts are complaining about their inability to adjust spending to address declining enrollment in their schools. And in some cases, that declining enrollment is experienced because of charter schools. While districts in this situation should be able to right-size their operation over a period of years, they cannot do so instantly, and it makes sense to provide temporary aid to districts that experience significant increases in charter school enrollment, perhaps by weighting charter school students at a higher rate. This could mitigate some of the pain that districts are feeling. I mentioned that the funding formula shouldn't be the state's accountability tool. It wouldn't make sense to withhold funding from schools with performance issues. That just further penalizes the students who are attending these schools. But it also doesn't make sense to continue to pour resources into chronically low-performing schools. Mark Gleason noted in his testimony to you that Pennsylvania spends $1.6 billion a year operating 150 schools that are in the lowest performing 5% of all schools in the Commonwealth. These schools have long histories of low performance, some of them over decades, and fewer than 30% of students in these schools are performing at grade level. Mark Gleason called them almost a life sentence to poverty for the students that are enrolled in them. Not only do we owe it to the families whose children attend these schools to do better, we also owe it to the taxpayers whose money is being frittered away at these schools. The state must be more aggressive in dealing with these schools. A consulting team is not going to fix them. Neither is an extra infusion of cash to pay for after-school programming, another teacher, or new computers. The state must use more radical tools to ensure accountability. Historically low-performing schools must be closed, and they must be replaced with new schools under different management. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine that every year we close the bottom-performing 2% of schools. These are schools that none of us in this room would send one of our children to. And then let's imagine that we did this year after year, and we put and replaced them with new schools that were managed by organizations that had a track record of some success educating children in these communities. If we did this year after year, not every school would be a wild success. But 20 years from now, we would be in a very different and much better place than we're in now. We may be moving towards a consensus on reshaping our school finance system so that money follows students and is allocated on the basis of student need. These would be very positive steps. But to make our public school investment productive, we have to ensure that students are not allowed to remain in schools where they are almost certain to fail. This is an historic opportunity for our Commonwealth. We have the chance to put this conversation about money and funding into its real appropriate context, which is the need for full educational opportunity for every child in the Commonwealth. Thank you.
I have to change the first line of my testimony from good morning to good afternoon. I would like to thank the Commission, Representative Lanjotti, for having us here at this testimony today. I would also like to thank you for inviting charter schools to be a part of this testimony. Many times charter schools are left out, and I do appreciate that. Thank you to the Commission. My name is Mike Gentili. I'm the CEO of Keystone Education Center Charter School, where I've been in that position for the past 17 years. With me is Jim Gentili, our Director of Finances. And we take a lot of pride in being Pennsylvania's first charter school. So I have to go back a little bit in our history books. It was 1996. We were running alternative ed from 94 to 96. We were a small alternative ed program, just contracting with local districts to provide education for those kids who were being removed from school for being expelled or suspended. So we were very small. So in 1997, this Act 22 of 1997 comes out, and Governor Ridge signs this legislation in July, and Keystone becomes the first charter school in this Commonwealth in August of 97. So that first year, there were only 6 charter schools across this Commonwealth, 5 being in Philadelphia, and little old us out here in Greenville, Mercer County, Pennsylvania. So we do take a lot of pride in that, and Currently, there are 174 charter schools educating over 128,000 students in this Commonwealth. So charter schools have grown, and many of these charters have a unique school mission. The mission of Keystone, the reason we were established, was to provide educational alternatives that meet the needs of a wide variety of students who have difficulty functioning in their traditional school environment. The intent of the school is to afford students the opportunity to gain positive educational experiences, to earn a high school diploma, to develop marketable skills for post-high school success. Many of our kids do not go on to college. Many of our students, we try to hook up. One year we actually had 7 students in a graduating class go into the armed forces. We try to hook our students up into technical schools and trade schools. So when we have a college fair, you know, it's not a ton of universities around. It's our trade schools and technical schools, and we're trying to push those kids into those areas. What I would like to discuss are really 2 areas that make us unique and different. One is our student demographics and our population. Keystone is a brick and mortar charter school operating out of 2 sites. We have a middle school that encompasses 7th and 8th grade with about 50 students in those classes and a very small class sizes. Our high school is a separate location that operates 9 through 12, and we have a little over 200 students in our high school. Our current enrollment is 252 students. These students come from over 40 different school districts in 13 counties across western Pennsylvania. 40 different school districts. Our student population, 100% of our population is high risk. They come to us failing. They come to us as dropout risk. They come to us behind academically. Many of them have been suspended and expelled from the local schools. They come with attendance problem, family issues, and I believe the Sharon Superintendent talked about transition, student mobility. It's not uncommon for us in a week to have 5 kids withdraw and 4 or 5 kids in that same week enroll. That's very common practice at our school. 95% low income status. 42% of our population is receiving special education services. 40% are involved with the court system. 32% of our 12th graders reported belonging to a gang, according to the 2013 Pennsylvania Youth Survey. The court involvement segment of our population has been adjudicated either dependent or delinquent through their county courts. That either being through children and youth services or juvenile probation. So as a charter school for at-risk students that are not having success in a traditional school environment, a daily focus is maintained on improving behavioral patterns which interfere with learning and lack of student motivation. I am pleased to say that in the past 17 years, Keystone Charter School has graduated 729 students that by their own accord probably would have not have graduated high school if Keystone Charter School did not exist. In fact, many of these students were the first among their families to receive a high school diploma. Keystone, while dropping out was a reality for many of these students, Keystone became their second chance. The next unique thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if there are any of the 174 charter schools across this state, I don't know if any are set up like this, is our governance structure. When we first opened as a charter school, our founding coalition was the Keystone Adolescent Center, which was a group home for adjudicated males, the Greenville Area School District, and the Reynolds School District. That was our founding team, our founding coalition. With that being said, the Keystone Charter School Board of Directors is a 5-member board that includes the Superintendent of Greenville, Mark Ferreira, the Superintendent of Reynolds School District, the Assistant Director of Operations of Keystone Adolescent Center. We have a parent representative and a community representative. But that's a unique structure as far as our governance. You know, to have two superintendents, and those two districts have provided tremendous support for our charter school over these past 17 years. We feel we provide a needed service to our local school districts in Mercer County while maintaining a good working relationship with these schools. Our goal is not to be in competition with area schools, but to be in a partnership working together to do what is in the best interest of children. I want to talk a little bit about finance. Unfortunately, at times the view of some is competition and less of a partnership because of the funding system that is currently in place. The funding system from the beginning of our existence created opposition to charter schools. The manner in which the funding flows has created and continues to create conflict over money between districts and charter. You know, when we were back in '97, we were the first school. We said, there were only 6 charter schools. We said, the way we're billing this is going to create opposition. So they like our school because we're dealing with all the kids that have been suspended and expelled. But there are going to be charter schools that are taking a different population of kid. And the way we're billing this is going to create opposition. So why should a school district get a bill every month from these charter schools? And as the years went on and the more charters grew, those bills became bigger and bigger. We said from year one that money should just go to PDE, and that money should follow that kid to that charter school. Instead of every month a district opening up a bill and go, oh, these charter schools are costing us tons of money. We get a bill every month from all these different, and we said that from year one, and it's never changed. So that has always created conflict between districts and charters. We're a small charter school, 252 students. We have a $4 million operating budget. So I'm going to explain some of the cuts we've had in recent years, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot to a small school when you're dealing with a small budget. Transportation reimbursement is the first. Charter schools receive no reimbursement for transportation. So in the 13-14 school year, student transportation cost our district $157,000, and we received no reimbursement back for that. In 2007, the state cut funding for alternative education for disruptive youth, and this was in excess of $250,000 to Keystone Charter School. Our most recent hardship was after the 14-15 budget was prepared and adopted by our school board. We were notified that the PECERS reimbursement would be ending. This amount signified over another $315,000 of already budgeted funds that we lost. With all these funding cuts, Keystone Charter School is experiencing severe issues regarding the financial stability of our future. Our budget reminds me a little bit of the New England Patriots footballs. It's deflating, and no one really has answers as to why. On a more serious note, the past 2 years have been a struggle financially for the charter school. We have worked hard to manage all aspects of our budget. Due to funding cuts, declining enrollments, and increasing cost, we had to lay off 6 employees last June. That was the first time in our 17-year history that we've had to lay people off. Even with this measure and reduction in staff, we cannot continue without jeopardizing the quality program we have established. Charter schools cannot increase millage or raise taxes to make up our funding differences. Charter school funding cannot continue to operate with fewer dollars per child, and whether that is 80% or 75%, depending on who you talk to, it is still less per child than district schools receive for educating that same child. We will not give up, and we will continue our mission as Pennsylvania's first charter school. This do not give up attitude is exactly what we try to teach our kids every day in the classroom. I am confident that you will do the same as you develop a funding formula for this Commonwealth. Whatever funding system is decided upon, it should value every child in public schools, including charter schools. Students should not receive fewer resources simply because of the type of public school they choose to attend. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Wheatley for Chairman Robach, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Question for Mr. Gentile. I see you have an enrollment of 252 students. Because of I'm sure you have a lot of transition in terms of students. In terms of how many students go through your school in 1 year? I know on any given day you may have 252 people, but in terms of people coming in and out, how many do you think you serve a year, at least partially?
I would speculate about 500 to 600 students every year.
Right, so you're looking at a significant number of kids who are
Turnover.
coming in and out and in and out through the
Correct.
system. So that's just a point. Obviously, this is a specialized school, but just to point out that particularly for students who face risk factors, all of which you've talked about in terms of low-income students, special ed students, court involvement, and our commission has talked about risk factors in terms of students. Here you've got a school that specifically is dealing with those types of kids, and you've got at least, 100%, 120, 30% turnover, if you will, within necessarily. How many of your students basically stay in the school the entire year, would you say?
Our residential program, we probably have about 90 to 100 beds.
Oh, okay, well, you have, as part of it, you have a residential program too.
Yes, and those
Okay.
students also attend the charter school.
Okay, all right. And the only other question I have is just Jeremy, maybe perhaps this to you and also Mr. Gentile. In your testimony, you didn't talk about cyber charter schools. There have been some concerns raised about cybers in terms of their performance as well as their finances. Can you give me we've had cybers now for almost a decade probably. Can you give me a perspective on your thoughts on cyber charter schools, and do you have the same concerns for them as you have for the charter schools? There's talk about moratorium on them. There's talks about we haven't approved a cyber charter school now in 2 years. Do we have enough? Do we need more?
I think Pennsylvania is one of the only states in the nation where the legislature has decided to treat cyber schools as charter schools. It doesn't make sense for brick and mortar charter schools and cyber schools to be considered the same animal. That needs to end.
So you're not are you saying they should be just treated differently, or are there concerns you have? Or why should they be treated differently, I guess?
Well, I mean, they have a different purpose.
Okay.
They have a different operation model. In other states, there's a different funding model for cyber schools. I think all those things, I don't think it does the Commonwealth's discussion about educational opportunity a service by lumping them together and talking about them in the same breath or the same sentence.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Gentile, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of cyber charter schools?
I know cyber schools, I know a lot of kids receive benefits from attending cyber schools.
Okay,
So,
All right, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation. I appreciate your conversations about history, because I've been on the same, in a different capacity, of course, but on the same journey with you. Haven't been around for the vote and the work on the charter school bill in '97, and seeing the evolution over time. Still proud of that position I took, and very proud of the position that charter schools play in the overall education diverse compendium, which is Pennsylvania. And I wanted to congratulate you, 18 years later, I guess?
yes.
For your sustainability,
Well,
I guess, right?
I had to
And
shave
something-
my head before I lost all my hair. So.
That's something that hopefully our work can be sustainable as your school has been. But you mentioned something that's very important, and that is, in regards to the original law we put forth, you never intend that the provisions of your law or the funding components of your law are something that would potentially undermine the sustainability of the model, that it would create conflict, that it wouldn't promote collaboration and advancement of both types of educational institutions. And we've seen over time that happening. And if we're going to advance something forward here that includes the consideration of charter schools, hopefully we can do something that allows for that, I guess, inherent conflict that we created to be addressed. And, you know, one thing that you mentioned that came up, and it's interesting how some hearings have common themes, the issue of categorical-based funding for a school like yours, that for a long period of time we had categorical-based funding for alternative education, and that line item has been exposed over time. And, you know, that leads to the argument of whether that's the best way to accommodate that type of funding. I've seen a lot of line items come and go in my years. I'm not even sure there's any left from the Ridge administration. They've been replaced, modified, you know, wrapped up in different forms. The one line item that has been there and has not left, actually two, I guess I can point to, and that is the line item for basic BF and special education. There's arguments about the amount of money in those line items, however, they're still there and they don't go away. So it's going to be, I think, some interesting conversation amongst the members of this commission as we move forward is how do we promote sustainability and funding, and whether it should be in the form of looking to our experts, as you had mentioned locally, as the decision makers. You know, I'm a policymaker who sits in Harrisburg. I'm not an expert providing education, and trusting those experts that in regards to funding institutions, they're the ones that can decide in regards to the interests that are best for our children. And a simpler form of funding is better in that regard. You know, that's really just an argument. There's many, many opinions on that, but that is a theme that's been brought up today, and I think we have to try to address that. One thing that your school brings into play in regards to our formula is the issue of matching funding from the state to the needs of a student, and how the current funding model for charter schools does that. Because right now, you have a student population that would be considered not in the average, right? And the funding model dictates the distribution of dollars for charters based on an average cost to educate. Now, I would expect that if you wanted to target funding to an institution or to a kid within a school that is not in that general category, that has higher needs, then the funding related to that child would have to reflect that. I guess a question that is specific to you but more general to our whole challenge is, how does that average that comes out of your 40 districts relate to the cost to educate for your non-special education students? Do you know that from your budgeting?
I'll refer that to our Director of Finances.
Hi, Jim Gentili, Director of Finances, Keystone Education Center. I mean, that's a good question. We range from 7,000 to 11,000, you know, between actually we've built over 55 districts this school year. And I mean,
55.
yeah, and you know, every school has a different rate. So that's,
Okay.
I mean, obviously, and if you look at our cost of instruction, the past 3 years when we've been in the red is obviously, when we had to make cuts, is obviously different than 3 years ago when we were able to give raises and had a full staff. So, I mean, that's...
You have to merge all those different tuition rates together to accommodate students. That would...
Right, and then we start the year with less students than anticipated, so that right away the budget's blown out of the water.
Okay.
I mean, it's I definitely appreciate you guys. I know you're dedicated. You're coming up to Greenville in January, and we appreciate your work there.
And just one other, I guess, comment, and to allow you to comment back, that I hear disagreements on in regards to the services provided in charters and how the funding flows in regards to the current model. You mentioned the issue of transportation, that there's no specific allocation for that. Some would argue that in that average cost to average tuition cost that comes from school districts, that in that tuition is what that school district would be paying for that transportation. So the tuition has that in it.
No, the 363 rate, that's one of the selected expenditures that gets deducted out
It's deducted out because
of the,
in the assumption, I try to work through this. Now, this is not a position. I'm trying to work through some of the things that come back to me. That it will come out if the district is providing transportation for that student already.
that's the way it's supposed, our local districts that are within a 10-mile radius provide the transportation.
Right, that's when it will come out.
Right, and they deduct it out, but there's still, it's the same 363 for, and, you know, being a rural charter school, we have probably 7, 8 districts that we bus from that are beyond that 10-mile, which they don't pay for it, and they subtract it out of the rate. And on top of that, no state subsidy.
Thank you. Very, very important point. And lastly, just to Mr. Resnick, you had mentioned in regards to how the funding from districts to charters don't accommodate for the loss of students that come from a district school. Then the districts can adjust over time to that loss. Some of the conversation we've had is, what is that relative loss and how you can adjust? I guess hypothetical is, if a district loses 50 children, maybe dispersed, but 50 children, there is a possibility that costs associated with educating within that school can be reduced because you don't need the same activities to invest in that traditional school. But if you lose 2 or 3 from different classrooms, you still have those same costs because you still have the facility, the teacher, the technology, everything in there. So that if we had to put together a model that adjusts a district's cash flow based on the loss of students, that it would have to start at a certain loss of students. You couldn't reduce a district's allocation for a loss of 2 or 3, but maybe when it gets larger, you could. Does that make sense from your perspective?
I mean, I think the real question is whether, I mean, districts have enrollment counts that go up and down. I mean, especially in this part of the Commonwealth, we've seen declines in population over a 20-year period, like the city of Pittsburgh, Duquesne, McKeesport, Woodland Hills. Some of that's not related to charter schools, it's just related to demographics. Some of it is related to families choosing charter schools. School districts have to right size for all those reasons. It's challenging to do. I'm not in their shoes, so I don't want to say it's possible to do it over a 5-year period or a 10-year period, but not a 1-year period. So I think the question in my mind maybe is not necessarily the number of students that go, but the length of the accommodation that the state recognizes the challenge for. Whether is it indefinite, or is it for the first 5 years, or what is it?
Thank you. And one of the things we're considering in our approach is to accommodate, to reduce some of that inherent conflict, to accommodate within our formulas that adjustment in student enrollment and costs,
Right.
so that both models are more sustainable.
Yep, I think that would be helpful.
I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen, for your participation. Appreciate it. We'll try to move it right along with our agenda. Next on our agenda is the Superintendent of the Erie School District, Dr. J. Badams. Thank you. I need that kind of help. I appreciate it. And Superintendent of this Corey School District, Bill Nichols. Thank you, gentlemen. If you could, each individually, just out of protocol, limit your commentary to 10 minutes apiece. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll go very quickly. I'll sound like one of those disclaimers at the end of a commercial. Senator Brown, thank you again, for being here and undertaking this very challenging work. Members of the commission, I truly appreciate this opportunity to provide testimony on the important issue of Pennsylvania's basic education funding. I'm here today to speak on behalf of students, our staff, board, administration, actually the entire city of Erie and our community, as well as, I think, some points that apply equally to the other districts throughout Erie County. I'd like to share information about our school system and some of the financial challenges we've faced really over the last 5 years. I hope this information is helpful as you continue to examine the current education funding system and recommend needed changes to remedy the inequity that exists across the Commonwealth and especially in urban areas such as Erie. Before I get into the data, I truly appreciate the difficulty of your task. There's such huge diversity of need throughout the Commonwealth, whether we're talking charter versus traditional public school, whether we're talking about urban versus rural. And also, we know the Commonwealth has its own budgetary challenges. I also want to acknowledge our own part in the financial conditions that have helped bring this issue to the fore. When Education Secretary Tamales admonished a group of educators at our very first meeting with him in northwestern Pennsylvania, many of the districts were facing devastating budgets in 2010 with the funding cliff from AARA. But we'd also negotiated unsustainable labor contracts in many cases, a point that he made very clear, even in the face of the recession, and admittedly, we were one of those. Since that time, though, we have significantly reduced staff, renegotiated labor contracts that include freezes, and any increases have been well below the CPI, and we've increased our employee health care contributions. We've closed 3 elementary schools, and that for a variety of reasons already discussed. We optimized our grade configurations, and we changed attendance areas in the schools that remained, and we did all this with consultation with an education planner. In addition to that, we've introduced an aggressive optimization plan that would further right-size the district and in the long term improve equity within our own district and parity with surrounding school districts, as well as improve the efficiency of our system. Unfortunately, this plan would require significant renovation and additions and would require additional state aid that we know we simply don't have available. We also had a ballooning cash deficit, which I'm sure you've heard about in other districts like ours. To counter that, we entered into an innovative leaseback arrangement with the Erie County General Authority to leverage our non-instructional real estate, which freed up $10 million of capital for us and helped us avoid a court-managed bond issue for unfunded debt. We've essentially in Erie changed the culture from don't worry, they'll find the money to how will we pay for this? And I truly believe that our board and administration have gained the trust of our community as careful stewards of taxpayer dollars. As a little bit of background, we have 11,740 students. We now have gone from 21 to 18 public schools, 12 elementary, 2 middle, and 4 high. We have 1,315 employees. And our current general fund budget is $149.8 million, and our tax millage rate is 16.62. When you put in our categorical funding, our total budget's $168,321, $135. As one of Pennsylvania's poorest cities, not a distinction we care to have, but we typically battle Reading for status as poorest. 80% of our students are classified as economically disadvantaged. And we're also, which you might be surprised to learn, Pennsylvania's second largest refugee resettlement location after Philadelphia. Our city's refugee population has increased nearly 800% since 2003, pushing the number of English language learners to more than 1,100, nearly 10% of our entire student body. We're close to 20% with our special education percentage, well above the national average. And interestingly, one might think that as an urban district surrounded by suburban and rural districts that we would have a very high per pupil expenditure, but if you look at our AFR, our actual instructional expense per pupil is the lowest in Erie County, despite the high percentage of students we have with special needs. Our schools serve the city of Erie, where the median value of owner-occupied housing units, according to the census, is $83,800, half the state average of $164,700. Our median household income of $33,000 roughly is $20,000 less than the state average. In the city of Erie, 27, almost 28% of all residents live below the poverty level, which is more than double the state average. As you complete the task of recommending a revised state funding formula, please give adequate weight to the additional educational costs of providing necessary basic and supplemental services to students with clearly documented curricular and support needs. I'm encouraged by the work of PASBO in considering many of these factors in their funding formula proposals. Over the past 5 years, we've seen our total state revenues fluctuate unpredictably, as many cities have. Funding sources that we received and relied on, such as charter school reimbursement, accountability block grant funding, ready-to-learn grants, distressed school district allocations, title funding, and so on, have gone up and down. Unfortunately, when we're already budgeting on razor-thin margins, these minor variations can have huge impact. During the campaign, rhetoric pointed to the state's total education budget spending as an increase each year. The net effect for school systems like ours was actually a significant decrease when you factor in the PSERS contribution. Our contribution during this current year was 21.4% and is scheduled to move to 25.84% of our total payroll. Interestingly, that, coupled with our charter school costs, are our largest reasons for not being able to balance our budget from year to year. In the 13-14 year, we had $2.2 million less in state funding to work with in the fiscal year than we did in 08-09 because of increased PSERS contributions. So combining this declining state revenue with rapidly rising charter school costs, increasing special ed costs, pension contribution obligations that increase annually, and growing healthcare expenses, we're in danger of bankruptcy in the near future. I think of the 12 different criteria that qualify under Chapter 18 as a distressed school district, we meet many of them. Although pension reform is not the focus of this commission, we can't do this work in a vacuum, and the context within which any funding formula will be implemented is dramatically impacted by these rapidly escalating costs. For the past 5 years, we've been in a situation where we've had to cut our way to a balanced budget every single year. The first year I took over in 2010, we had to cut $26 million from the 11-12 budget. It was we had an audit report that showed we had hired over 190 staff over a 5-year period of static or declining enrollment. There was room for us to cut, and so ironically, this was easier to make those large cuts. But as the years have gone on, this has been an increasingly painful process. As I mentioned in the outset of my testimony, the refinancing options of our various debt instruments have been maxed out. We've closed, as I said, 3 elementary schools. We've furloughed more than 200 staff and initially cut the central administration in half. My assistant superintendent and I have insisted on 5-year pay freezes. Our non-instructional employees and administrators are paying significantly more for health care, and any salary increases we do approve are far below the CPI. Despite these efforts, we're already forecasting a $7.4 million deficit for 2015 and 16, and for the sake of brevity, I won't detail all those, but again, we're facing another round of cuts in order to balance our budget. The simple reality we're all facing across the Commonwealth and feeling even more acutely in poor urban and rural districts is that our costs are absolutely guaranteed to rise at a higher rate than our revenue. Even the maximum allowable tax increase and potential referendum exceptions under Act 1 would fall short of even our net annual PSERS contribution increase. We simply can't close the gap under the current system. It's sad that a single-digit budgetary shortfall doesn't seem to cause too much tumult in Erie these days. But since we've already cut our way through 26, 14, 9, 5, and now this year's budget, we really are stretching to figure out what else we can cut. Our tax base can't handle additional tax increases. In a conversation with our assessment office, our assessment officer actually believes that we're at a tipping point in the city of Erie where people are going to either try to leave or not be able to sell their homes. The city's own financial challenges have played into this, and our taxpayers have been forced to bite off an even larger piece of the education funding pie. Considering the fact that in Erie, 30% of all city property is deemed tax exempt, $2.6 billion in assessed real estate value. The burden is even greater on the individual homeowner in our urban area. Also want to mention that that statistic again. Erie's public schools serve a city where the median value of owner-occupied homes is $83,800, half of the state average. And unfortunately, when more than 50% of our revenue comes from the state, increasing local taxes is the only other way we can raise our top line to meet our expenditures. And with all due respect to the previous speakers, I do want to mention that it is a financial issue, this notion of how do we fund charter schools, and I am pleased to hear that this is being given serious consideration by the Commission. At the same time that charter schools have disproportionately impacted budgets of their authorizing districts, there have been, especially locally, matters in which clear regulation and accountability has led to well-documented fraud and abuse, especially in the cyber arena, leaving our children and taxpayers worse off by any objective measure. For a starter, please remember the in-depth reports of both our current and former auditors general, as well as a national study of charter school performance conducted by Credo at Stanford University. When more than 1,900 of our students are attending charter schools to the tune of $20 million, it's simply a non-sustainable model of funding public education. We're essentially funding two separate systems from the same pot of money, then forcing both systems to use that limited funding to pay our solicitors to fight over everything from the application process to payment reconciliation, all out of that same pot of money. The excesses of the cyber charter schools are well documented. We also have charter schools in our city that have fund balances close to a year's worth of operating expenses. It's clear that something needs to change. Again, putting this into perspective, our $7.4 million deficit that we're facing now would be completely erased without any legislative fiat if we simply fully funded the charter school reimbursement line that was originally written into the law. So again, broadening the context of this committee's charge, in addition to finding a fair and equitable funding formula, we really do need to review and provide some sort of reform to the existing charter law. So if we fail as policymakers to address these challenges, we, as a school district, along with many other districts, will go bankrupt, as others already have, some of us sooner than others. In fact, according to a 5-year budget projection created for us by a Public Resource Advisory Group, we will not be able to cover our payroll obligations sometime in 2018 or 19. This erosion of our public education system and inequitable funding for our students with the greatest needs will cause irreparable damage to students, cities like ours, and really our Commonwealth's viability economically. That's what makes all of our work together so important and so difficult. And I just want to say that as a member of the State Board of Education, a school district superintendent, a resident taxpayer in the city of Erie, and as a parent of children in Erie's public schools, I share your commitment to finding a way to equip our schools with the resources they need to provide every child with the quality educational opportunities they deserve, and in a way that eases the burden currently shouldered by local property taxpayers. So thanks again for the opportunity to provide this testimony and really for the important work that you're engaged in. It's vital and it's crucial, and time is of the essence.
I also thank you right from the beginning. It must be exhausting to have heard from superintendents across the state. And it could be part of the reason why I just read in PSBA 60% of them switched jobs of superintendents in the last 2 years. This is a little untraditional, might surprise you, but I would like to congratulate them, and I know they left. Mr. and Mr. Gentili operate a charter school that I see as a positive thing. I see it as meets the state standards of unique and different and providing a service to school districts and to our state. So I compliment them on what they do and how they do it and see them as totally different than the comments I make about the threats that I feel from the charter schools. I am William Nichols, Superintendent of Corry Area School District. I'm pleased to provide our district's information for your review and as we see the importance of the fair and equitable funding formula as vital to our school district. My age tells you that I may have been, and I was around. I was one of the 5 school districts that sued the state a number of years ago, which was also about fair and equitable funding, so it's been a long time for me. I'm currently in my 44th year in public education, my 40th year as a public school administrator. During my time with Corry, I've watched significant changes which have led to my strong commitment to fair, equitable, and consistent funding for our financial future. And for the educational future, I tie the two together. For us, it's also our local taxpayers. Corry Area School District is located in 3 counties, Crawford, Erie, and Warren, in northwest Pennsylvania, with the center of district being 35 miles southeast of the city of Erie. Our district has approximately 225 square miles, and I want to equate that for you because it's not easy to understand what that means. We drive to California in the morning to pick up our kids, and on the way back, we only get halfway back because it's not quite far enough to get all the way back. So we're about 3,300 miles per day driving out to pick up our kids and deliver them back home. The 2,150 students, approximately 15,000 residents throughout our district. During the past 30 years, Corey School District has been impacted by the departure of local industry and a significant growth in low-income families and students. Our district's demographics and high tax rate, and I'll explain that, make growth difficult for our communities. Although the entire district is making an effort to try to change that, to stabilize our area, the point is it's been very difficult at this point in time. We have 23% special ed population, and based on the way that's funded right now, we receive about $1.1 million towards a $3 million bill. We have one single segment of our population. You fund us $1.1 million. It takes us about $750,000 to meet the Amish students' needs in our district. We have economically disadvantaged of 60%. We have a median income average of $18,000 in our district. The transient population was interesting in the preceding districts who I was surprised to hear we are similar. 400 students of our 2,100 come in and out during the school year, obviously bringing with them a significant risk. There are 17 districts in our intermediate unit, Northwest Tri-County IU5, and our district is 14th at this point, 14th of the 17 for the lowest income in northwestern Pennsylvania. We always average in the bottom 20 in the state of the 400, and 99 or used to be 500. Additionally, during the past 20 years, we have had the highest per capita tax with this low income for 18 of those 20 years. Only the most recent 2 have we been able to lower taxes to fall out of that high tax rate. Below, I want to list a few of the things which seriously concern our district in the next few years, which will make a significant difference in our educational and financial status. The Corey School District, as I've stated, is a low-income district with a high number of special needs students and a high property tax. We offer excellent programs, in-service training to meet our teachers' needs, to meet our district needs, to the students and the community. During the past few years, we've been able to maintain and increase student programs, while at the same time maintaining and even slightly reducing our property taxes and maintaining steady improvement on our test scores. Our district provides such services as before and after school latchkey program for pre-K to 5th grade students, which also includes an educational program during that pre and post part of our day. In addition, despite the lack of state funding and a very high poverty rate, we have maintained strong educational programs, and including being a comprehensive middle high school, we have 10 vocational programs which are thriving. We have as high in the high school classes as 45% of our kids attending vocational programs. These programs are clearly at risk with the funding and what I'm calling the unfunded mandate changes, which is primarily charter schools for us. To sustain the growth in the programs we've implemented, we made several cost-cutting measures, such as reducing the number of principals, which is always difficult. People want that, but it doesn't come easy to reduce your principals. Reducing the number of teachers through attrition, and reducing the purchasing of supplies and equipment. We also closed 2 elementary buildings with all students now filling the seats of 2 brand new buildings, the oldest of which is 4 years old. I was verbally attacked this afternoon by one of the elected officials for closing one of the buildings in his district to save that money. I find that unbelievable. Again, these efforts enable us to maintain and even increase our programs for our students. All of this leads to our potential financial crisis, including a reduction in many of these programs. As a district, we now face a charter school request, which, if approved in Harrisburg, will cost our district a new expenditure of $1.3 to $2 million of our budget. And of course, as you know, this will be new expenses. If they enroll the 100 students from our districts, which the charter application projects. As you know, 100 of 2,100 students will not bring a reduction of $1.5 million in our cost, if it brings any reduction at all. The number of students they're talking about will spread 7 grades in 3 separate buildings, we will not see much of a cost reduction. And as we know, Act 1 will not permit a 19.2% increase, nor will we be able to get that from our taxpayers, but it will not permit that to happen. I hate to even mention the risk of our entire educational program faces with a potential charter school, as well as the impact of a list of the items that are listed below clearly shows us at a financial cliff. These, of course, will seriously impact the education of our students. PSERS, I think we all know about the retirement. To me, I'm calling them mandates. I know people don't always like that. Cyber charter school, it's the cost for that. It's not a competitive situation for us all. The cyber charter schools have been running about $400,000 for our district. The greatest number of enrollees they have are the students we've put the pressure on about attendance and truancy, and it drastically increases our dropout rate as they return. The brick and mortar has not cost us much because of our location and the size of our district. We've not had to bus kids out, but we're now facing a $1.2 million increase the first year if they get their number, which will be devastating. Special ed requirements, we love these kids. They do very well in our building. We have a principal that takes them to lunch. He sticks out his arm every day for a lot of the handicapped kids. He walks them to the lunch line. It's great, but our costs are phenomenal to meet their needs and not being funded. I know this sounds small, but I just think it shows the impact. PIMS, we understand the need for it and the use for it, but even that in a small district increased personnel costs. Equitable and consistent and fair funding has been on the table for much of my 44-year career in education, and it needs to be resolved. The mandates, especially with the cyber charters and the brick and mortar, have had serious financial and educational impact on most districts, and now our district faces that. If you're a longtime school board member, superintendent, or elected official, you know what it's been very difficult in the financial process with flat funding, and many may not remember that argument, but flat funding, reduced funding, Act 1, increased mandates, the cyber, brick and mortar, which are unfunded mandates, and many more funding issues that have stressed many districts to the financial ledge. Again, I can't thank you enough for hearing us out and for meeting with us. I think it's a drastically important issue to our district and to the state of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Longetti, please.
I want to thank you both for traveling down, and certainly it's very important to hear your testimony from your districts. I'm interested, particularly with Erie. I know you face a lot of poverty, so does Corey. We've heard some testimony in the past about that when we weight kids in poverty, that we shouldn't necessarily treat every poverty child the same, that some need supports that others do not. And we also we've heard about kids who have been affected by trauma, whether that's a parent that's incarcerated, whether that's something horrible that happened in their midst. And I wondered if you could shed light on those two concepts, and particularly on the poverty one, what measures might we look at to determine kids who are in poverty that need more than an average poverty child?
Right. Sure, that's an excellent question, and I think it highlights the fact that when we looked at even the state's accountability model until recently revised, we had some students who qualified as they were economically disadvantaged, also receiving special education services, and fell into one of the N groups or one of the minority clusters that had gotten over the threshold of the numbers. So essentially, in the accountability formula, they were counted against us potentially if they had a low score multiple times. What is common with 80% free and reduced lunch is that poverty is a common denominator for most of our kids. So looking at that factor and having some weight associated with that would probably, depending on what that weight was, would probably catch multiple challenges that a given student could have. But absent that, we have some students who are gifted who are poor. We have some students who are receiving very costly special education services who are also poor. and everything in between. So that's a tough question to unravel, but it would depend, again, on the individual circumstances of each child.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just to follow up on your one comment, a very interesting comment regarding the weighting in a formula for children in poverty. General categorization at risk, lot of data sets is children in poverty at risk. Because of that, parallel correlation requires additional funding. You had mentioned, just maybe anecdotally, but I'm sure it's not anecdotally across the state, is that there's not a universal correlation, that there's children in poverty that are in gifted programs. So if we're going to provide for a component of a formula where we're providing additional money in a category for poverty and additional weight, should we weight generally and then on a student count basis reduce out those children who would not need additional accommodation, even if they're in that poverty category? That a child is maybe in poverty but is able to perform at the same, at an exceptional level.
Sure, but with additional support, would that child perform even at a higher level? So I guess the question is if a student in a district that's well-funded that has access to an SAT prep program might fare quite differently upon graduation than one who is likewise gifted but doesn't have the same chances. But the answer to that question probably lies in the data that the state has been using to establish the school performance profile, because
That's right.
as you're aware, that when they kind of clustered students as historically underperforming, my guess is that somewhere in that calculation there's some equalization in there somehow, that they found that students on average who are economically disadvantaged performed here.
Right.
So with just the diversity that you're facing with this task, I think you're going to have to look at averages and take a look at some of those metrics.
I would like to rely on averages unless there's a way to be more, based on data sets, be more specific outside of averages. And if there's a data set that somebody fits into that we use for poverty, but there's also a data set that dictate that child is performing similar to other children with the same level of services, not additional services, then should we have a revenue expenditure match where the revenue is higher than the expenditures needed? Because we can allocate money other places then and better target those dollars. That's my only point, is that we tend to believe that children in poverty are in a general category and all of them are at risk and all of them need special services. And that might not be always the case. And we have the data set now based on proficiency in tests to determine that.
Your point is a great one, but I think would be impossible to administer at the state level, but at the local level might be. So if you look at districts around the country that have been using weighted student funding formulas for their own internal budgeting, they're allocating funds from the district level out to the schools based on just the sort of calculation that you're describing, this very individualized weighting of here's a student who's autistic, however, is also gifted. So maybe doesn't need the same intensity of service that a student who is autistic, who is not performing in terms of achievement at that high level. But that would be really, I think, unwieldy at the state level to try to make those individual, like DNA sorts of calculations.
Trying to get as specific as you can, but not get too, you're right, because then it's hard to defend.
But required of us. I mean, if you push districts to do some sort of weighted student allocation with those funds, it would help us also to deal with some of those mandates that Superintendent Nichols just delineated.
And Superintendent Nichols, you mentioned a lot about charter schools. Just want to reiterate, there is some active conversations in our commission about a component of the formula that relates to charter impacts, to accommodate the financial needs of both institutions. And also a conversation about waiting for vocational programs that you mentioned. We're going to actually have a separate hearing in Montgomery County, I think it's next week or the week after, where we will hear testimony on vocational programs and how that has to be accommodated in our formula if there is a need for additional investment there and for our formula to reflect that. So I just wanted to mention that.
I would just share, if I could, on the conversation with poverty for a second? Because we are really small compared to what Dr. Badams is talking about, this transient population is clearly a significant challenge. I don't have an answer for it. It certainly is huge. I speak tonight as part of a committee that's working on blight in throughout our community and going after funds to take care of part of that. But really, there is a distinct difference with the cost that it takes to keep up with a transient population, the incoming, the outgoing. And I will tell you that the number one thing that brings them to our district is something old people like me can't really get adjusted to, but Craigslist. They find out about the apartments, and they know what Pennsylvania pays higher for welfare families. And at Christmas time, we registered 21 kids the day after Christmas, and 19 of them came from Georgia, Ohio, New York State primarily. And they came to low-rent apartments. Their Section 8 money is transferable, as we all know. So it's not, and it buys more in our little community, so therefore they move in. But again, those kids, those families get more from Pennsylvania than they do their states, and so they just come in. And they actually, in the Craigslist situation, wonder why they moved in with ex-boyfriend who had 2 kids, and I bring 2 kids, and at the end of 3 weeks, while we now have people in separate apartments looking for more people off Craigslist, it's really become a significant issue, and there is a cost separation there.
You're recommending a separate consideration in the formula for that?
I think it certainly is, and I think anything that can be done. I don't know what can be done on the state level, but certainly families are moving into, at least in our area, moving into our state from other states because they gain dollars for their families just for being here. And we actually have them move in from other states and register in the office to get on the cyber, so we leave them alone. We are already seeing, we're going to see a drastic growth in homeschool kids with the new law. I understand that a wealthy community may not, where they have tutors and they have all kinds of positive things going on in their household, but we will see every family that we put pressure on about truancy or grades or behavior, they will go homeschool. Now, that might save us a few dollars on cyber. That's not the intent, but clearly see an issue there coming for us.
Thank you both. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are at the end of our formal agenda, but we do have a public comment period. There has been one individual who has signed up to be part of that. We'd like to give that person accommodation. We'd like to maintain public comments to a 2-minute period, but you may step forward, please. William Hall. William, if
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I can read fast.
Okay.
Had I had time, I would have prepared and gone with my comrades, but I'm busy putting the house back together up in Mill Creek Township School District, so I'll try to be brief and keep it under 2 minutes.
Okay.
I would just like to add some perspective. We have a unique situation. This all ties into what we've already heard today, so I'll try not to repeat a lot. But in January of 2013, following the abrupt and unexpected departure of my predecessor, I inherited a school district with an $8.8 million deficit, a depleted fund balance, and a very angry school community. To balance the budget that year, we raised taxes, we cut positions, we refinanced our debt, and we closed 2 elementary schools. Last year, our deficit was $4.4 million, which we closed with another tax increase, taking advantage of the exceptions, absorbing positions, and making a concerted effort to control expenses. Looking at next year's preliminary budget, our goal remains and must continue to focus on controlling expenses. We are doing this, but we are now having to meet a challenge to do this, in that a local charter school, the Montessori Regional Charter School, has made a very public appeal to purchase one of our closed buildings to facilitate their effort to expand. My response has been publicly that this is a bad business decision for the school district. The response from the public on the other end is that the district does not support charter schools, and we fear the competition of Montessori education. What we are finding is that our community is becoming divided over this. And quite frankly, I think it's because of a lack of education generally that's out there in public in terms of how the funding works for, in this case, Mill Creek School District. So very briefly, I'd like to just go through how I've been responding publicly I have said that this is very risky for the school district to sell a school to a charter school because it will result in increased expenses to us in terms of losing students. Currently, there is a flawed state funding formula for charter schools that contribute to the increase in expense for the budget. The Montessori offer to purchase the building of $1.1 million would be paid back to Montessori within 6 years if we were to lose 20 kids due to their expansion with the current charter tuition payments that we would have to make. And I've said generally that this sale is not in the best interest of the district or our community. Briefly, we lost 7 students. Not that we lost 7 students. 7 students chose to go to Montessori this year from the district. That added $58,744. If these students are in first grade and they matriculate through grade 6, that would be an additional $352,000 to our budget over 6 years. Now, what I've said when I made the presentation is those 7 students went on their own accord. If we sell the building to Montessori and they expand, they would look to increase to a K-8 program, and they would also have more capacity, more seats, and therefore have the ability to attract more students out of, in this case, Mill Creek School District. I did the quick math for everybody. Tuition charge for Montessori for what Mill Creek pays for a regular education student is currently $8,392. The special education cost is $17,892 per student. In doing the math, if 17 students at the regular ed rate and 3 special ed students at the special ed rate went next year, if we sold the building, that would equate to $196,340 that we would have to absorb in additional expenses in our budget for next year. If you multiply that by 6 years, they have $1.1 million back. I've also stated publicly why it's not in the best interest of the district or community, because if you think about it, if we sold a building that is owned by the Mill Creek taxpayers to the regional charter school, we would essentially be using Mill Creek taxpayer dollars to purchase a building that's already owned by the Mill Creek taxpayers. We do run our own Montessori program in the district. We run a Montessori education program. I personally feel if we run the program and we offer it, let us run it, and we should be able to do that. And I think my 2 minutes are up. But what I do want to say is what is in the best interest of a community is a healthy public school system. That's the backbone of your community. That's what maintains and grows your home values, not an expanding local charter school that continues to deplete your budget and increase your expenses. That's all I had to say on that topic. I'd be more than happy to talk about cyber.
We have to keep the protocols consistent across the state. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your work.
Thank you very much. End of our formal agenda. I wanted to thank everyone for participating and testifying. I wanted to take an opportunity to acknowledge that we had received, for the record, testimony from 3 other districts in our region here: Warren County School District, Girard School District, and Connaught School District. We encourage public and any of those interested in our work to participate in that regard. If we try to do our best to accommodate as much as we can in terms of our formal proceedings, but encourage those to participate by submitting testimony as well. I wanted to also announce the time and date of our next hearing and the place. It'll be Thursday, February 5th, 2015, February 5th at 10 a.m. at the Central Montco Technical High School in Plymouth meeting. Any other questions or comments from members? Hearing none, thank you for your participation. This commission meeting is adjourned to the call of the chair. Thank you.